What's up, y'all? This is DTP, and today in this video we're going to be going over what I believe to be Sora's win cons versus every character in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. If you're new to the channel, I am a Sora main who's played Sora in Smash for about 4 years now, and since then I've been ranked numerous times and I've fought a ton of strong players in Tri-State, and with that knowledge I feel I wanted to give my thoughts on what is the best way to beat every character in the game. Before I dive into all of the individual matchups, I wanted to give y'all a look into how I approach Sora's win cons, or more specifically, what he is good at and how to abuse what he is good at. In my opinion, Sora has 3 main focus points in a vacuum: area control, kill power, and offstage. Area control focuses on Sora's Keyblade and spells and their ability to kind of just make it annoying for the opponent to move around often, whether it be due to them not having the range to fight Sora at certain ranges, lacking the mobility to really check Sora on certain moves, or their outer shield is too poor to stop Sora from kind of just mashing around their shield. Sora's second trait, and arguably his most obvious one out of these 3, is how strong he is offstage. He doesn't really have to fear offstage interactions in the same way that a lot of other characters do, which lets him get away with more cheeky edge guards or just kind of being off stage for longer to avoid certain options. Sora's third main focus point is his kill power, which you might find surprising due to how light he himself is, but due to his high damage output and his very strong combo game, he can kind of be sort of a glass cannon to the point that he'll even outpace a lot of average characters when it comes to taking stocks. In an actual matchup, odds are Sora's not going to have the advantage in all 3 of these categories per matchup, and it's going to fluctuate a lot. So, for each character, we will have these 3 main focus points ordered from most to least relevant, leading to one of these following 6 win cons. The regular dude win con is named that way because it kind of forces Sora to play like he's a normal character. Most normal characters don't want to be off stage too much because that's when you're at the highest risk of losing, and they kind of just want to play out neutral until they can come across a kill, which is what a regular dude does. Now, unlike the regular dude win con, where I wouldn't really say that Sora wants to necessarily camp as much as he kind of wants to play like a normal paced neutral, social distancing, you are not really trying to get near your opponent all that much at all. Whether it be because Sora's combos aren't effective on the enemy character, or it could also just be that maybe Sora's combos are okay, but the enemy is just way better at landing their own kill confirms. Sora's camping. Like, I really don't want to simplify any of these win cons to just camp, but if I had to pick any of them to say that for, it would definitely be social distancing. The middle 2 win cons both focus on Sora's ability to take stocks easier, but they differ in terms of pace. Weight Room is the slower paced one. You don't necessarily have to rush getting the kill, it's just something that's gonna naturally happen over time, whether it be to your confirms being better or the opponent just not being that great at taking stocks themselves. Also, I know Sora isn't actually heavy in the game, but the Weight Room name kind of plays into offstage being the worst thing, as the heavier you are, the faster you will fall. Animal Style, on the other hand, you are really trying to pressure the opponent at every chance you get. Odds are Sora doesn't really have the area control advantage in a way that he can kind of just wait out stuff. You kind of have to throw yourself at the opponent and just make stuff happen. The last 2 rightmost win cons focus on getting the opponent off stage, but these tend to be the hardest to actually execute because, you know, your opponent isn't just going to want to jump off for no reason, so you kind of have to bait them into going there in some way. The fear-mongering win con works the most off of fear, using the fact that you know you have a clear offstage advantage, and you may also at least match them in kill power if not surpassing them, so your opponent is usually going to be scared of you in a way that you can kind of predict their movements and eventually just corner them in a way that they'll have to go off stage and risk certain things. Rage baiting is sort of the opposite. You're not trying to corner them to the point where they have to make mistakes. You're actively trying to anger them or rage bait them, and they're charging at you like some type of angry bull. Some important disclaimers before we actually get these matchups started. These tips are meant to be something to fall back on, but they should not actually make up your entire game plan. Different opponents and game-specific situations will likely require more directed counterplay. As noted in the red text, you are responsible for your own adaptation. Second important note is look, I've played this character a lot, I've had a lot of success with the character, I consider myself to be one of his best reps, but I am one guy. I could be wrong on a lot of these. At the end of the day, this is something that's a lot less objective than my combo guide that I made. I'm not just like reading off data and explaining how it works. So feel free to consider and comment your own perspectives. Like, I am open to learning myself. So keep that in mind. I am trying my best to make these as applicable as possible, but at the end of the day, it's a fighting game. People do different things. Metas are still being developed. I could be wrong. First off, we have the Mario matchup. I find kill power to be the least effective thing to focus on versus Mario. I mean, both sides have shorter kill confirms, both sides have longer combos, but to me, I just think Mario has a slightly easier time just kind of coming across stocks, whether it be due to his very strong out of shield, especially with up smash and stuff like that, whereas Sora kind of needs a specific combo confirm, like he has to get in there, he has to land in a certain way. Mario doesn't really have to think about that stuff as much, which tends to be in his favor when it comes to last hit situations especially. Area control is pretty equal between both sides. I mean, I know people say that Mario struggles versus swordies, but Sora's not really a traditional swordie. Like, his frame data isn't as fast as a lot of the other sword characters, which lets Mario get in a lot easier. But, you know, the disjoint is still there. I would say spells and fireball tend to equalize, because, you know, spells are more... they're deadlier in a sense, but Mario's fireball is way more consistent. So, I would say area control feels about even out of these three categories. That leaves offstage as what I believe to be Sora's best bet versus Mario, and it's not that Mario is like terrible offstage or anything, it's just, as long as Sora is being like somewhat competent offstage and just kind of paying attention, he probably isn't going to die all that soon, whereas Mario might just get gimped at 30 if he doesn't have a double jump and he has to up B, and then Sora counters the up B. Even if you don't counter the up B, like, Mario's approaches of like diagonal fireball trying to get back, Sora's counter beats that out. I just think Mario has a noticeably harder time comfortably making it back to the stage when they can't just rely on their up B to beat out whatever their opponent does, because Sora can intercept it. Odds are you're not actually going to land like, you know, like gimp recoveries every single stock, but just the fact that Mario has to play around it in a certain way can open up certain spots to land more damage, get more hits in that you probably wouldn't have had if he didn't have to worry about getting gimped as early. Overall, I don't think the gap between these three categories is actually that large, but if you had to focus on something, it's generally best to focus on throwing Mario off stage rather than trying to net kills every time you touch him or something like that. Versus Donkey Kong, this might come as a surprise for y'all considering how big I am into Sora's combo game, but I actually find kill power to be the least effective win con to focus on versus Donkey Kong out of these three. It's not that Sora can't combo Donkey Kong, he obviously can in most situations, but Donkey Kong can also combo Sora. I mean, Sora is a light, floaty character. You get grabbed once, even if you don't die to the immediate cargo throw combo, you're still getting juggled by up airs. You still might just die to stray smash attacks, his charge up punch. Like, both of these characters can die at high or low percents. So I don't really think this is a position that Sora can reasonably outpace Donkey Kong in, despite the fact that his combos do work on him. Offstage is a little more in Sora's favor, but again, I don't think Sora outpaces in the way that people would think he'd outpace versus Donkey Kong, because, yeah, while Sora can pester Donkey Kong a lot with his forward air, spells, counter, stuff like that, DK has, like, pretty high aerial mobility, and that combined with his back air and, like, a million spikes that he has, I think Donkey Kong can edgeguard Sora pretty well. If you really want to argue that Sora still has a slight advantage offstage, I could agree with you, but I don't think it matches just how much better Sora is at controlling space in this matchup, which is what I find to be the actual focus point here. Donkey Kong has no projectiles, a huge hurt box, and is fishing for a grab on a character who spends a ton of time throwing out disjoints in the air. All in all, he just has a really hard time getting around Sora's spells, Sora's aerials, just about anything Sora is just doing in neutral. The reason why it seems like Sora is so much better at taking stocks is because he has an easier time finding openings due to the amount of work DK has to put in to actually approach Sora, which usually just plays into Sora getting cleaner hits to start combos. Next up, we have Sora vs. Link, a matchup that, despite how popular both of these characters and franchises are, you're hard-pressed to find many VODs of this that aren't on Elite Smash. Despite that, I still think I have a pretty clear handle on what's good and what isn't good versus Link, and the worst thing is absolutely offstage. The combination of just how strong Link's ledge trapping is between his high base knockback moves, his bomb setups, and then the fact that he can use his bomb to just ignore a lot of edge guarding situations himself, I just can't really think of a reason why Sora wants to be off stage in this matchup very often. Like, yes, you will occasionally have moments where Link leaves his bomb off stage and you have time to jump at him and use your down B or something, but usually versus good Links, that's just not gonna happen all that much. Kill power is about a 50-50 between the two of them. I mean, they both have their potential man combos at like 3 reps in the world do per character. And they're also just pretty good at finding stocks in the normal way, whether it be to just simple confirms into smash attacks or just high base knockback moves and juggling. I don't find that either character has a clear advantage in kill power. I actually think area control is where Sora should focus the most versus Link, which might surprise you because Link has kind of been the poster boy for annoying character that just throws stuff at you from across the stage. However, the combination of Link actually being even slower than Sora is, and a lot of Link's projectiles having some decent counterplay, like Sora can just counter the boomerang and now it becomes his. So Link's bomb can be picked up, so Sora can either just pick it up and throw it up in the air, he can throw it somewhere else, he can throw his own fire at it to explode it, which kind of just leaves him with arrow, which, you know, I'll admit, it's a little annoying for Sora because he doesn't have a great double jump in neutral, but usually Link is the one who has to force himself to get in, more so than Sora does. Now again, to reiterate, right, like back to when I was talking about regular dude versus social distancing, I don't think Sora should be outright camping, because odds are if you're camping, your back is against the wall, and that means you're near the ledge, you don't want to be off stage versus this character. But you can kind of use that mild range advantage to predict where Link is going to end up a lot of times, counter his falling nairs, just kind of call him out in ways that you wouldn't be able to do if not for how weirdly adept Sora is at shutting down a lot of Link's zoning tools. Now, Samus, and by proxy Dark Samus because they play the exact same, I think this one's not going to come to a surprise. Sora is not the one controlling space in this matchup at all, and I think it's the reason why a lot of people that pick up Sora struggle versus this character a lot. She has better projectiles, she has a pretty strong grab that goes very far, and she has an out of shield option and a screw attack that covers both sides, so, you know, it doesn't really matter how and what way Sora is mixing up his exact positioning. If he's too close, he's just going to get hit every time, and that damage racks up a lot. So I really don't think Sora gains much from trying to win in the area control battle. Offstage kind of goes back and forth. I mean, Samus is notorious for how strong her ledge trapping is, but I think Sora is weirdly good at edge guarding Samus compared to other characters, because usually how Samus recovers is that she waits out characters with her, I forget the exact name, but like the Morph Bomb, you know, the Morph Bomb stalling. You can't really outstall Sora off stage. Like, he can wait out, he can stall at his own time with spells, and eventually Sora will just have time to hit Samus. So I think both characters can get messed up off stage a lot of times. The actual advantage that I would say Sora has in this matchup is definitely kill power, which may not make sense in a vacuum just due to how heavy Samus is, but Samus doesn't really have any kill confirm. She kind of just has to find a stray hit with back air, or maybe she gets like a cheeky screw attack combo, but for the most part she really has to work for her kills. Whereas if Sora gets the right opening, Samus can just kind of die at a relatively early percent regardless of how heavy she actually is. Even on the stocks that you aren't landing longer combos, I find Sora's shorter nair up smash confirmed to be more consistent than anything Samus has, so you really want to focus on forcing those situations as much as possible, and not really worrying about waiting stuff out too much because, you know, like, you're not winning the long game versus this character. Yoshi is on the exact opposite spectrum from Samus because kill power is the last thing you really should be worried about in this matchup. Yoshi has the weight advantage, but unlike Samus, it actually matters versus Yoshi because not only does Yoshi have his frame 1 double jump armor or flutter jump armor if I want to be specific, to avoid Sora's confirms entirely a lot of the time, Yoshi also has his own confirms. Like, he has like drag down back air stuff, he has up air combos that are really dangerous versus Sora. You're gonna have a lot of stocks where Yoshi is living to like one 40 or something, and then like you eventually take their stock at 150 and you die at like 80, and that'll just happen over and over again because your Sora is not taking the stock at early percents in this matchup very often. Offstage tends to be rather even. Yoshi's mobility makes him pretty scary to recover versus a lot of the time, but Yoshi's flutter jump is both a blessing and a curse, in that if he loses that flutter jump for whatever reason, he doesn't really have a good recovery move, so odds are, like, if you intercept the flutter jump with, like, up air or back air, or, like, fire, I don't know, something like that, and he has to air dodge back to the ledge, you just F-tilt or dash attack and he just loses a stock. So, like, I wouldn't say that I don't love being offstage versus Yoshi, but there are some times where Yoshi will just lose his stock at like 40. So I would say this is about even. Overall, I'd say area control is pretty obviously Sora's main win con here. I mean, Yoshi is a lot faster, but he doesn't have disjoints. He's surprisingly floaty, and he has a pretty bad grab. So a lot of the time, Sora can just kind of cover space with his aerials and spells, and Yoshi just has to hold that for a lot of the match. So it helps to make up for the fact that Sora isn't going to take stock super early, because at least Sora is good at racking up damage in a way that Yoshi can't usually match without getting hard reads and just being right more often than not. Also, Yoshi has Egg Toss, but I mean, come on, like you can counter it for no risk. Even if you get Egg Toss, odds are Sora's spells are always going to be much more threatening, and Yoshi doesn't really have an anti-projectile tool in the way that Sora has his own counter, so I would say Sora is usually winning the range battle more often than not. It comes down to abusing that while not trying to rely too much, or really at all, on taking stocks particularly early, because that's usually how Yoshi gets reversals and Sora dies in turn. Kirby is a good example of a matchup where, like, I ordered these 3 win cons, but I don't think Sora is necessarily bad at even focusing on kill power. I just find it to be the least effective. I mean, both characters can take their stocks pretty early. They have fairly low weights. Sora's combos can be strong on Kirby, but the fact that Kirby can low profile a lot of Sora's rising aerials, or even just normal aerials, makes it hard for Sora to actively fish for them. So I would say to not focus on kill power as much. Between offstage and area control, I honestly had a hard time thinking about which one Sora did better in. I mean, Kirby is so slow in the air and so stubby. I think Sora is pretty effective at just tracking him off stage with forward air and back air and stuff like that. But, you know, I do think that a good Kirby will find opportunities to edge guard Sora back in certain positions, whether it be just like constantly daring his up B, lining up a stone like a down B or something like that, lining up back air. I would say that area control is the simplest win con for Sora to focus on because, I mean, it's fairly obvious. Kirby has very low range overall. Like, even his close range is pretty stubby. He doesn't really have any real disjoints. And, like, yes, if Kirby inhales Sora, Kirby gets the spells, but I'm gonna be brutally honest with you, I think getting inhaled for this matchup is kind of a skill issue, and I also just don't think Kirby can even utilize the spells as well as Sora can. So overall, I think Sora kind of trolls Kirby hard regardless of whatever Sora's doing, but just kind of playing keep away and abusing Kirby's poor mobility feels like the most consistent way to just win a lot of the time, although, again, I don't really think it's hard to take Kirby's stock early. It's just, I feel like if Kirby can match us in any category, that's the one he's best at, so why focus on that one, right? On to a much more difficult matchup than Kirby, we have Fox, and I find the win cons here to be fairly straightforward. I think area control is Sora's weakest point in this matchup for sure. Yes, Sora has a disjoint that Fox doesn't really match, but Fox is just so much faster in like every way, combined with him having laser and reflectors so that Sora can't really maintain long range that well. It's hard for Sora to abuse his mid-range in a way that actually matters in a longer game. It also doesn't help that Fox's out of shield is very good, so even if Sora does get close, if he gets a little too mashy, Fox can usually just punish him for it. Kill power goes both ways. I mean, we've all had stocks as Sora where we fight a Fox and we just die to up air at like 80 or something, but Fox is also one of the lightest characters in the game, and even with Sora's combos being a little more annoying just because of how fast Fox falls, we usually don't have to do that much crazy stuff to just take his stock early at times anyway, so I would say this is an about even category relative to the other two. And to the surprise of no one, offstage is the thing that Sora should be focusing on the most in this matchup. I mean, Fox he falls so fast. If he air dodges in one position he shouldn't, if he gets gimped at any point, he can just plummet to his doom. It doesn't help that his up B will just explode versus Sora's counter, and honestly, above everything else, it's also the fact that Fox, because of these offstage fears, he's not really in a position to jump off and chase Sora that much. So, like, even with Fox's like very strong ledge trapping, it's often Sora's advantage to just kind of opt to retreat off stage a lot of the time because he can't chase him down there. Like, the risk reward is just never gonna be in his favor. So again, I'm not saying Sora should be planking necessarily because Fox's ledge trapping is very strong, but I feel like opting for offstage, not just to throw Fox offstage, but also to just kind of go there in times of distress, will tend to be Sora's best odds of winning this matchup more often than not. For Sora versus Pikachu, I'll be honest, you'll be hard-pressed to find really any top-level VODs of this matchup, but I do find the win cons to be fairly straightforward from a theory perspective. The first thing is that offstage is just clearly not the place for Sora to be in this matchup. Pikachu he's probably one of the few characters in the game who just straight up has a better recovery than Sora in a lot of situations. His quick attack is just so fast, covers so much space, can cover so many different angles. Sora he really cannot pressure Pikachu off stage in a way that matters a lot of the time, while at the same time, Pikachu can make Sora's life off stage a living hell. I mean, low risk T-Jolts, combos of like up air into fighter off stage, combos into thunder off stage. Sora does not want to be off stage this matchup at all. It's a bad time. Area control comes in second place here, and while you could probably argue that Pikachu does slightly win this category, I do find it that Pikachu has to work a little hard here at certain points. Like, obviously he's way faster, Thunder Jolt is a lot more consistent, but he also kind of has a stubby issue to where if Pikachu's in a position where he has to approach, it can be kind of annoying for him. So while I don't love playing the long game versus Pikachu, it is a game that Sora can play to decent effectiveness when the time comes. However, I definitely want to consider that to be the primary win con. The actual primary win con here is kill power. Now, it's not that Pikachu can't rack up damage. We've seen the top level VODs of Shining Mark doing like 0 to 60 bear loops and stuff like that. But usually when Pikachu doesn't land his confirms, he struggles to take stocks just like in last hit situations. Whereas Sora not only has his combos, which while are annoying, are doable on Pikachu, I just find that he's much better at just randomly coming across straight hits sometimes, like whether it be just landing an up air that kills Pikachu at like 100, landing a dash attack, landing like just a normal Nair up smash. I just think Sora has a slightly easier time at taking stocks in those last hit situations, whereas Pikachu, like, he has his combos, but Sora also has his own potential man combos, so to me it just comes down to both characters sometimes die early, but usually when it comes down to high percent, Sora has an easier time. So I would say Sora doesn't really want to rush things, but does want to kind of assert his higher kill power to take stocks earlier, while also not messing around too much off stage, because nothing good can really come out of that in this matchup. Now, versus Luigi, I don't think I really need to explain for very long why kill power is the lowest priority. I mean, Luigi's combos are extremely notorious, and his frame 1 down B armor makes Sora's combos mostly negligible, so yeah, like that one's really straightforward. I think it comes more down to explaining why I find area control to be a little more effective than offstage for Sora to focus on. Luigi's recovery is clearly flawed, I will not deny that, and there are situations where Sora can edgeguard him, but Sora's really weird double jump actually makes it kind of hard for Sora to checkmate Luigi, because Luigi can usually just react to when Sora's approaching him in a certain way and just mix up his timing so that unless Sora just hard reads the side B, like, Luigi will usually make it back. There's also the fact that I don't really love being off stage for too long versus Luigi, just because, I mean, Luigi has stuff like down air, back air, and his air pressure to kind of make the ledge not too habitable for Sora. So I would say, like, yeah, there are obviously moments where you'll be able to plank, and there are moments where you will be able to edgeguard Luigi, but I don't think it's as big of a focus point as it is for a lot of other characters in that matchup. Area control to me is the main thing that Sora should focus on for a few reasons. One, Luigi's effective range, kind of like Mario, is a little flawed, but even more so because I don't find the range and angle that Luigi's Fireball covers to be as strong as Mario's. And another big thing is that unlike Mario, Luigi is way slower in the air. So like if he jumps at you, it's a lot easier to just kind of hit him before he can get close enough to trade, as opposed to Mario. There's also the fact that a lot of the time Luigi is looking for a grab, and it's pretty hard to grab a character who's constantly just throwing out aerials in the air in the way that Sora does. Again, not many matchups where I would say that just outright camping is actually that effective for Sora, but this is one of them. This is one of them. Versus Ness, if you've ever seen this matchup played, you know that Ness never wants to be off stage because Sora's counter just outright beats Ness's PK Thunder, whether it be the PK Thunder 2, where Ness goes forward and then immediately explodes, or even just countering the Thunderball, or like the little electric ball so Ness can't control it as well anymore. Ness does not want to be off stage all that much. Admittedly, Sora can get edgeguard sometimes himself, but that's usually more of Ness getting a hard call out with like a downer or a PK Fire, as opposed to Sora just being able to checkmate him at like really any percent, as long as Ness doesn't have a double jump remaining. That leaves the discussion between area control and kill power for which one's the least effective, and I think kill power is pretty clearly the worst one here. Sora's combos can work on Ness, but his hurtbox is kind of weird, and not only does Ness have his own form of like potential man combos like PK, PSI Magnet stuff, but when it comes to lasted situations, Ness just destroys Sora, I'm gonna be honest with you. Way better stray hits, way better options off of grab, I'm not gonna say that Sora is necessarily bad in lasted situations generally, but versus Ness, I don't know. It feels really bad when both characters are like 120%. Ness usually just wins in those spots. That leaves area control as the middle ground for this matchup, and it tends to be more of a stalemate that I think a lot of people, especially like lower level Ness players, tend to realize. Like, obviously Sora has his disjoint and his Keyblade, but he can't really use his spells as much because Ness has PSI Magnet, so it kind of just turns into like a short range versus mid range battle versus two characters that are both floaty and not that fast. It tends to even out a lot of the time. Overall, you want to get Ness off stage while also not putting yourself at too much risk of just kind of getting hit on stage too much, so honestly, Sora does have to play it a little slower, but I wouldn't necessarily say he should be camping, just be careful. Versus Captain Falcon, it's pretty ironic that one of the most normal characters in the entire game forces Sora to play in a normal manner to be the most effective, at least in my opinion. This may be somewhat controversial, but out of these three categories, I think offstage is the worst thing for Sora to focus on versus Captain Falcon. I will not deny that Captain Falcon can occasionally get gimped, but he's just so much faster in the air. It feels challenging for Sora to both recover versus Captain Falcon without just getting dare spiked every time, and to even edgeguard Falcon due to how good his air drift is. Kill power kind of goes in both ways. I mean, Sora is very light, so that makes Captain Falcon's confirms into knee and even just like sour spot dare. Like, it can be pretty easy for Falcon to just kind of delete Sora's stock sometimes, but Captain Falcon is relatively susceptible to Sora's combo game, so he also has to fear Sora in a lot of situations. I think both characters can just be really messed up when it comes to taking stocks in this matchup. That leaves area control as what I find to be Sora's best focus point here. Captain Falcon, he has a mobility advantage, but he has no projectiles, no disjoints. He really just wants to be in Sora's face a lot of the time, which tends to play into Sora just kind of landing hits in the ways that he wants to in neutral. I also find that Captain Falcon's hurtbox, specifically how tall it is, makes it even harder for Falcon to just kind of move around Sora's lingering hitboxes, even if the Sora doesn't have like a particular plan behind them. Rounding out the 64 cast, we have Jigglypuff, and if you know anything about Puff, you know that offstage is the last place you want to be versus that character. Sora's recovery is very strong in a vacuum, but Puff's aerial mobility is just absurdly fast to the point where a lot of the time, even if Sora tries to wait out Puff's options, they will usually be able to just repeatedly hit Sora until he dies anyways. Puff's mobility also just makes it really easy for her to just kind of avoid Sora in offstage situations when she's trying to recover. Kill power tends to be a double-edged sword in this matchup. Jigglypuff has her rest confirmed that can kill Sora very early, but Jigglypuff is also one of the lightest characters in the entire game, to the point where even if Sora isn't landing longer combos, she'll just die to very basic stuff at stupidly early percents. Really, both of these characters can die at just about any point of the match. Above everything else, area control is pretty clearly Sora's main win con in this matchup, just because even though Jigglypuff is very fast, in a similar manner to like Yoshi, she's just so stubby and lacks really any disjoints or projectiles to where, like, yeah, she's fast, but it's still hard for her to really approach Sora in a way that matters. I don't think you should be outright camping Jigglypuff, because that usually means you're cornering yourself, which makes it easier for her to just kind of knock you off stage. But you definitely want to keep your range advantage in mind versus this character, because Puff really cannot do much about it if Sora just kind of remains at mid-range at all times. Next up, we have Peach/Daisy, because they play the exact same, and the lowest priority thing for Sora in this matchup is definitely kill power. It's not that Sora can't combo Peach, I've done it a decent amount of times, but Peach's combos are just kind of at a different level entirely. I mean, like, with the right turn-up setup, Sora can just actually die at 0, and even not including the combo game, Peach just tends to be a lot scarier in last-hit situations just due to how fast her float cancel aerials are. Offstage goes back and forth. I mean, Sora can pressure Peach and Daisy pretty well offstage with his disjoint spells, countering Daisy's or Peach's up B, but Peach's turn-ups allow them to pressure Sora pretty well offstage while also still giving them enough space and time to get a ledge trap going. I find area control to be pretty obviously Sora's main win con in this matchup, just because Peach and Daisy are kind of notorious for being fake top tiers, and that they are very clearly strong in a vacuum, but they really struggle to deal with characters that just don't really have to play the game with them, and Sora fits that bill to an extent. The combination of Sora's spells and just how good he is at controlling the airspace with his aerials, it just makes it hard for Peach to abuse her float movement in a way that actually matters a lot of the time. Admittedly, I don't think Sora is particularly strong at approaching Peach himself, but if he plays neutral correctly, I don't really think he should ever end up in a position to where he'd need to do that all that much. Bowser is the second super heavy of this video, but I actually find that Sora's win cons versus the character are a lot different compared to Donkey Kong. Unlike Donkey Kong, I actually do think that kill power is the main thing Sora should be focusing on versus Bowser for a couple key differences. The main reason is that Bowser doesn't really have a lot of kill confirms in the same way that Donkey Kong does, so he usually has to just outright read Sora to find stocks, whereas Sora can just combo him at any percent and he might just die. There's also the smaller point that I don't even know if I mentioned this outright in the Donkey Kong section, but Donkey Kong has a frame 1 hurtbox shift with his up B. Bowser has nothing of that sort, so Bowser should just outright be dying every time Sora starts a combo, whereas Bowser doesn't really have kill confirms of his own. Obviously he's way heavier and Sora's super light, but again, in practice, that weight difference doesn't really matter if Bowser still has to be right multiple times, as opposed to Sora just hitting him once or twice. Offstage goes both ways here. Bowser's recovery is pretty straightforward and not too hard for Sora to intercept, but I also really don't like being at the ledge versus Bowser in this matchup. I mean, you got like Nair into Bear confirms, you have F-tilt shenanigans, or even just run off forward airs. Bowser can be pretty scary off stage as well. The worst thing, in my opinion, to focus on versus this character is area control, which might seem weird because he has a big hurt box, he doesn't really have a good projectile in neutral, so why can't Sora just play keep away? Well, besides the fact that Bowser is noticeably faster, has an aerial command grab, and a pretty good out of shield in his Whirling Fortress, above all else, it's just like, you have the option to just take his stock whenever. You playing more passive is just going to let Bowser get away with more things that he really shouldn't be able to. You would be surprised how many Soras I've seen outright explode in this matchup because they just aren't that good at comboing characters, so Bowser just lives for a while and they get outmatched. what should be a +2 can very easily turn into a scary even if you don't just take advantage of your kill power advantage. Now, if you know anything about Ice Climbers, you know that the Ice Climbers have been wobbling people way longer than Sora has, so kill power is not what Sora should try to really match his character in. To put it quite simply, Sora does not have much counterplay to Ice Climbers combos, whereas the counterplay that the Ice Climbers have to Sora's combos is that there are 2 of them, and Sora's hitboxes really do not like dealing with more than one opponent at a time. Off stage is pretty scary for either side to deal with. I mean, Ice Climbers desync stuff looks outright unfair at top level a lot of times, but not only does Sora's large hitboxes make him pretty good at just kind of chasing Ice Climbers off stage, his counter is good at both dealing with high recovery Squall Hammers and also just occasionally entirely intercepting their up B and just gimping them immediately. So, as is the counterplay versus Ice Climbers for most characters, Sora should really just be trying to keep distance a lot of the time. Besides the fact that the Ice Climbers just aren't that threatening at long range in general, Nana has a really hard time dealing with Sora's spells, and that, like, Thundaga and Blizzaga especially, if they get hit by that, Nana is usually doing their own thing for a little bit, which gives Sora an opportunity to just separate them even further. You basically want to play keep away until Nana is forced into a weird position to where you can then separate them further so that it's easier to actually take their stock. Versus Sheik, some may argue that it's really hard for Sora to control space versus the character due to how fast she is, but however hard that is, offstage is way worse. Sheik is very strong at edgeguarding Sora, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't think Sheik's recovery was ever designed with ledge trumping in mind. There's not a whole lot Sora can do to actually edgeguard that character unless they just get really lazy with a bouncing fish that Sora can counter. In actuality, I don't find area control to be that bad versus Sheik. I mean, obviously she's way faster and has needles which are more consistent in Sora's spells or whatever, but like, Sheik has to be very particular about when they do or don't swing. Sora doesn't really have that problem. A lot of lingering hitboxes that Sheik just has to respect a lot of the time because she lacks the activity on her own aerials or out of shield to dissuade Sora from mashing. This also kind of plays into why I think kill power is Sora's best bet at dealing with Sheik in the matchup. Sheik has very scary combos, but Sora also has his own combo game, so it kind of just revolves back to that issue I described earlier where Sheik just can't afford to trade with Sora in a lot of situations. Not that Sora should really rush for these kills, but usually if the Sora just plays neutral out for long enough and takes their time, they will just end up taking stocks earlier because Sheik just can't really afford to force as many situations. Now, Zelda shares a similarity to her counterpart in that Sora doesn't really want to be off stage all that much in the matchup, but it's for a slightly different reason. It's not that Sora can't edgeguard Zelda, as her teleport is a lot easier for Sora to occasionally intercept with things like counter or forward tilt. The actual problem is that recovering versus Zelda, specifically getting off the ledge versus Zelda, is just an absolute nightmare to the point where the risk reward for jumping off stage to chase Zelda is just not really worth it a lot of the time. Now, unlike Sheik, Zelda is actually a little better at just kind of randomly getting stocks at times due to her lightning kicks, but Sora is also still pretty good at landing his own confirm, so I don't think it's an area that Sora is outpaced in. It's just not something Sora should max on as much as he does versus Sheik. Sora's actual best bet versus Zelda, in my opinion, is area control, which might not make a lot of sense to you, and I think is part of the reason why a lot of Soras tend to lose to this character for some reason, because they don't really understand how to control space versus Zelda. The main issue for Zelda is that her mid-range is terrible, and she doesn't have the mobility that Sheik has to actually make up for it. People tend to fixate on Phantom being hard to deal with, but Sora's counter not only makes it so that he doesn't have to take any shield damage, but the important thing is that it doesn't reflect the move back, so Zelda can't even use her own reflector to nullify it. It's just something Sora can do to not have to care about the move as much. Now, I definitely don't think Sora should be outright camping Zelda, but I think a healthy combination of knowing when you can sit back and knowing when you can jump in and pressure with mid-range will make it so that Zelda has to take a lot more risks on average. Dr. Mario is basically just a more polarizing version of the Mario matchup. Everything that I said about Mario mostly still applies in just more extreme ways. Kill power is still the least effective thing for Sora to focus on, but unlike versus Mario where I felt like it was something he just slightly lost in, I think Dr. Mario is just a lot harder to fish for combos versus, because his out of shield is even more annoying to deal with, and Dr. Mario just has a lot of moves that just will outright kill Sora, whether it be like his up B, down B, just random FU smash attacks. Area control is still mostly a middle ground in the matchup, which might surprise you due to how much slower Dr. Mario is, but the main reason why I still feel like this is only the second best win con, besides the fact that Dr. Mario's offstage just terrible, is Dr. Mario's pill is a lot more immediately threatening. Due to the combo potential Dr. Mario has with the pills, I would go as far to say it's just an outright better long-range option in the matchup compared to Sora spells, which might be a little controversial, but regardless, Dr. Mario is still a lot slower, so I would say area control is still a fine place for Sora to focus in. However, Dr. Mario has one of the worst recoveries in the game, and Sora is pretty strong at dealing with said recovery due to just how long Sora can wait out Dr. Mario's stalling options and how slow Dr. Mario is. It's not really a surprise that Sora should be trying to throw Dr. Mario off stage at any point that he can. It is worth noting that I actually find Dr. Mario to be a little scarier to recover versus compared to Mario due to how strong his down B is at killing off the side and the fact that his spike is a lot easier to land, but I mean, his recovery is just terrible. Like, I don't really think that's enough to dissuade me from trying to just kind of sit off stage a lot of the time. Versus Pichu, I would say that there's definitely a similarity with the Pikachu matchup in that Sora does not want to be off stage for really any time at all. Basically, everything I said that Pikachu had, whether it be like the combos, the Dare Spike, T-Jol, it's just all more threatening now. I do think Sora is a little better at like ledge trapping Pichu, just because Pichu's up B doesn't have a hitbox and it's also easier to two-frame, but a lot of the time it just doesn't really matter. Like, you just don't want to be off stage much in that matchup. Unlike Pikachu though, I don't think kill power is something that Sora should focus on as much versus Pichu, although I don't think we're outright outclassed in it. Pichu's combos and kill power are a lot more immediately threatening, but it's also Pichu. This is the lightest character in the entire game. Even with Sora's difficulties comboing the character at times, the most simple confirms will just kind of just randomly kill this character, and if you do manage to land a combo, this character could die at obscenely low percents. The actual focus point that I think Sora should go for in this matchup is area control, which might not make a lot of sense at first because a lot of Pichu's moveset is pretty similar to Pikachu's, so why is Sora's neutral just better against it all of a sudden? It all comes down to the main difference that Pichu and Pikachu share, and that Pichu takes damage for a lot of their moves, including their T-Jolt, which is often what the rats use to actually get in and force Sora to do things. Unlike Pikachu, Pichu often has to find their way in neutral because otherwise they're just gonna kind of take themselves out of the game with their self-damage, which in turn makes them easier to intercept as opposed to Pikachu. For Falco, you definitely have to approach this character differently than how you approach Fox, but one similarity is that offstage is still Sora's best bet for sure. The gap isn't as extreme as it is with Fox because Falco's recovery is a little better, and Falco's also better at edge guarding himself with his down air, and also like if he parries, he can get down tilt on Sonic Blade sometimes. But even with that, I still think offstage is pretty clearly Sora's best bet, as Falco could just get gimped and die at very low percents. Where he differs from the other species is that I find area control to be a little more feasible against Falco than Fox and Wolf for the sole reason, honestly, of Falco is just way slower. Yes, his laser can be annoying, but at the end of the day, Falco has to be close to really do a lot of damage, and it's hard for him to quickly get close without a very committal side B, whatever it's called, the Phantasm. So I think it's easier for Sora to kind of play out the mid-range compared to fighting Fox and Wolf, who are way faster. But again, because of Falco's lasers and his own reflector being very strong, I do think that it's playable, but I wouldn't say it's the best thing to go for. That leaves kill power as the worst, which is a little ironic because Falco is technically the most comboable character out of the three species, but like between him still having a frame 2 air dodge, and he has a frame 3 nair to attack Sora if we drop the combos, and his own combo game is just so strong, I find that if I focus too much on trying to take early stocks, it usually just leads to Sora exploding. So my recommendation is to really focus more on just throwing Falco off stage when you can, but also being willing to play out some a somewhat slower game just because Falco does have to force things to get in more than Fox and Wolf do. Now, for Marth, I kind of had to think a lot on this one because you'd be hard-pressed to find a lot of top-level Marth play, let alone Marth versus Sora in particular. But if I had to pick the worst thing for Sora to go for, it would be offstage. Yes, Sora can counter Marth's up B, but outside of that, it's pretty hard for Sora to go out and edgeguard Marth at times just because his frame data is so fast. He can usually just like react and swat out Sora before Sora really has a chance to do a lot. Honestly though, the biggest reason why I don't like being offstage versus Marth is more so his ledge trapping. I find Tipper to be just very terrifying at the ledge, to the point where like even if I'm easily making it back to the stage, there's just a chance that I'll die at like 50 or 60 if the Marth lands like a Dancing Blade or an F Smash or something like that. Kill power is in the middle ground because on one hand, like, you know, Marth has his tippers. Sometimes Sora can die early, but there's also a lot of times where Marth just doesn't really land a tipper the way he wants, and Sora lives weirdly long for how light he is, so it can kind of go one way or the other. It is worth mentioning that Marth has a frame 1 escape in his Dolphin Slash, but like, it puts him in so much risk. I wouldn't really consider it like, you know, I don't consider it to be a combo breaking tool in the way that like Luigi Cyclone is. It really is very committal. So this kind of just comes down to how consistent or inconsistent you find Marth's own kill power to be. I don't know, I just threw it in the middle. That leaves area control as what I believe to be Sora's best bet in the matchup for the simple reason of Marth is, you know, better at mid-range off of frame data, but that's kind of the only place he's better at. He's not getting anything off of grabs, and he has no projectiles or anti-projectile tools, so he kind of has to play around that extra space that Sora can cover both with his spells and also just having a more threatening grab game. There's also the other really annoying thing from Marth is that, yeah, his tippers are really cool for taking stocks, but they make it harder for him to play out neutral for very long because, you know, when you're focusing just on playing at mid-range, it's not as easy to always ensure you're landing tippers and whatnot, so Marth can struggle to really rack up damage over a long period of time, whereas Sora does not really struggle from that same issue. Lucina is the first Echo Fighter who I actually think warrants a slightly different approach compared to their original counterpart, but offstage is not the difference here. I'm not as scared about her ledge trapping because she lacks the tippers that Marth has, but her lack of sour spots makes her edge guarding a lot scarier because you don't really have the chance of just getting hit whacked like a sour spot forward air and not really go anywhere. Like, if you get hit by a back air off stage at like 90, Sora's probably gonna die. And she still has like that floatiness that allows her to kind of wait out Sora's options. So I think, yeah, for similar reasons to Marth, I think she is still pretty strong off stage in the matchup relative to the other two categories. I also find that area control is a little more playable for her for that like same reason that she doesn't have sour spots to worry about, so she can focus more on just abusing her faster frame data in neutral. But with that being said, she still doesn't really have an intuitive way to deal with spells, and her grab game is still pretty weak, so, you know, she can play it better, but I don't think it's something that Sora can't match her in or even still surpass in a lot of ways. The main difference here is, without the tipper sweet spots, Lucina really struggles to take stocks. I mean, a very common reason why people have started putting Lucina lower on tier lists is because she just doesn't really have that X factor to stand up to the average character. Even with Sora not being able to as consistently rely on his combos due to Lucina having a frame 1 escape, besides the fact that that frame 1 escape is very committal, like, Sora's just basic combos and kill confirms are still way more consistent and more damaging than what Lucina generally has to work with. Versus Young Link, it's actually the opposite order of categories compared to Adult Link, and it mainly ties into the difference in Young Link's arrows and their bombs. Fire Arrow makes area control very hard for Sora to maintain in the matchup. He just doesn't really have the means to check Young Link for throwing out a Fire Arrow in a way that matters. It also makes cycling out Thundaga feel borderline impossible. This is all while being faster than Adult Link, still having a boomerang, and his bombs, while not as, like, I wouldn't say they're as deadly as Link's remote bomb, but he absolutely makes up for it in his Fire Arrow, so I just don't really think Sora gains much from trying to control space for too long. Kill power is still in the middle. Young Link has crazy long combos, Sora has crazy long combos. It kind of goes both ways. You could argue that Young Link's frames through air dodge makes it so that Sora's a little worse in this category, but I think Sora has an easier time just kind of taking stocks off simpler confirms, whereas Young Link usually has to land something crazy to take stock, so I would say on average it evens out. This leaves offstage as Sora's best bet in the matchup, with the most obvious reason for this being that unlike Link, Young Link doesn't have the remote bomb to just kind of skip recovering a lot of the time, meaning they actually have to rely on their up B, which Sora can pretty easily counter. Even with their tether recovery, Sora's spells are pretty good at intercepting Young Link before he gets a chance to actually use it. There's also the fact that I just don't find Young Link to be as threatening in the ledge trapping department. They're still pretty good, right? Like, they can still get some bomb setups, but a lot of Young Link's just stray hits are not as strong as Link's, so we're not really at risk of dying as early, and, you know, like, remote bomb is just an entirely different beast at the ledge. I don't really think it's comparable. This is definitely a matchup where you kind of have to look to try and cheese the character, because you're definitely not going to beat Young Link in the long game. On to Ganondorf. Now, I don't think I really need to explain much why offstage is Sora's best bet versus him. Sora's recovery is just, like, it's better than Ganon's to a cartoonish degree. I wouldn't say Sora can exactly fall asleep at the wheel offstage, as Ganon definitely does have some ways to get some early stocks with, like, down air and up air and stuff like that. But, like, I mean, come on, dude. Like, just mix up your timings, throw out spells and forward air, back air. Ganon does not really want to be off stage much, and if they feel comfortable being off stage, you're likely doing something wrong. Now, on to area control. On one hand, Sora is faster, and he does have projectiles that Ganon lacks, but besides the fact that Ganon has Wizard's Foot to deal with Sora's being a little too spammy with the neutral B, Ganon's aerials are just kind of the size of Sora's Keyblade at times. Like, I'm pretty sure Ganon Nair beats Sora Nair in trades way more often than you would think. So because of that, I actually don't think it's super effective for Sora to focus on just camping Ganondorf for that long. Again, I'm not saying Sora should be, like, playing aggressive or anything, but I find that a lot of Soras will lose this matchup because they focus so much on being nowhere near Ganondorf without realizing that, like, we're not that good at just strictly keeping Ganondorf out. At least not in the way that our moveset would imply. That leaves Kill Power as the least effective, which may surprise you, as, I mean, if you've watched any of my combo guides, you know that Ganondorf can get combos from hell and back, but, like, the thing is, in practice, if you are fishing for these combos, odds are you're just gonna kind of get yourself set up to get, like, nared at a shield or up smashed. Ganon's at a shield is just very powerful, and I don't think I really need to explain how Ganon is good at taking stocks just on his own accord. Again, I'm not saying that Sora can't kill Ganondorf early, but it just feels like the worst thing to double down on, considering that it's something that Ganon can absolutely do back to Sora in a similar fashion, if not better in practice. Okay, I'm pretty convinced this matchup has never been played at top level at any point, literally ever, but I will try to explain it anyways. I think offstage feels pretty bad in this matchup. It's not that I find Mewtwo's edge guard to be that scary, although he does have some scary things. Like, he has, like, forward air, back air, down air spikes, weird up air combos. But the actual reason I really don't like offstage is just because of Shadow Ball ledge trapping. I don't think Sora has a ton of counterplay to it, to be honest. And importantly, unlike Samus, who Sora can often track better off stage, I don't have a lot of personal success edgeguarding Mewtwo back. So if I'm not getting a ton of consistent edge guards, I don't really see the reason for me to play too close off stage, or I'm just kind of getting myself set up for, like, Shadow Ball ledge traps or getting spiked off stage and stuff like that. I feel like Sora is better off usually avoiding off stage in the matchup. Area control is more of a 50-50. On paper, Mewtwo should kind of own this category because he's way faster, has a much more consistent projectile, and he kind of has a mid-range in his own right with his tail moves, but, like, his hurt box is just so big. It's so hard for him to move around Sora's aerials and just all the hitboxes that Sora can throw out. I find that, like in theory, Mewtwo should be able to control neutral better, but in practice, he just kind of gets hit in a lot of weird spots that is just annoying for someone who's fighting Sora to deal with. That leaves Kill Power as Sora's best bet, in my opinion, which may surprise you because Mewtwo is kind of known as a glass cannon who has some crazy combos, and don't get me wrong, like, Sora can die somewhat early on stage in this matchup. But besides the fact that Sora has his own combos that are just as deadly on Mewtwo because Mewtwo is lighter than Sora, I just feel like even the shorter combos are just so good versus him. Like, he's lighter than Sora, and he has a huge hurt box, so a lot of the times he'll just get caught in combos randomly and die. Again, admittedly, I don't have a lot of data on this matchup, but in my head, the way this matchup plays out is as long as Sora just doesn't end up off stage very often, he'll usually just kind of end up outlasting Mewtwo in the damage department. Versus Roy, I would say that area control is pretty easily Sora's best bet in the matchup, because while Roy is faster than Sora, due to his lack of air drift, it's actually pretty hard for him to mix up his mobility in a way that Sora can't really fight back against. Additionally, the combination of Roy's sour spots kind of forcing him to be up close and Sora having spells and projectiles that Roy doesn't have means that Sora usually has a pretty clear effective range advantage in neutral. Kill power is the middle ground in the matchup, I would say. Both characters have ways to take stocks off of the other in pretty early percents. I mean, Sora just has very long combos, Roy does a lot of damage, has a lot of knockback, and Sora is very light. So both characters can die pretty early. It's basically the theory of Sora's longer combos versus the, in practice, effective Roy just kind of running Sora over. I would say at a top level they tend to even out. That leaves offstage as the least effective thing to do versus Roy, which might surprise you considering the fact that Roy's recovery isn't really anything special. But this comes back to Sora's mobility or lack thereof, making it actually pretty hard for him to react to, like whether Roy angles his up B a certain way, or whether he just air dodges. A lot of the time, Sora just has to guess. He doesn't really have the time to just react to what Roy is doing. When you combine this with Roy's ledge trapping via his Jair combos and just random FU side Bs, I find that I usually lose the most when I try to focus too much on offstage because I'll just miss the edge guard and now I might just die to the ledge trap. Now we have Chrom, another Echo Fighter that I have ordered differently, and this time it's the exact opposite to Roy. Yes, Chrom still does have some pretty good ledge trapping, but his recovery is just so cartoonishly bad. It warps the matchup to where now I actually do want to just try to fish for offstage stuff because Chrom can just die at any point. There's a lot less mix-up potential of Chrom's recovery as opposed to Roy's. On the flip side though, Chrom's lack of sour spots makes his area control a lot more consistent and threatening compared to Roy, to the point where now with his mobility and him just having an outright advantage at mid-range, I don't usually like to make neutral last for too long versus Chrom because he tends to just be able to outmaneuver and hit Sora where it counts. Kill power is basically still the same thing. I mean, you could argue that Chrom doesn't have as much X factor on taking stocks because he doesn't have the sweet spots, but Sora's light enough to where it basically is the same thing. Chrom can take stocks of up air like up air juggling and just raw damage output. Sora's combos are basically the exact same on Chrom. It's the same discussion for the most part. You could make an argument that area control and kill power should swap, but I'm going to be honest. I just don't think this matchup happens enough for me to really make an opinion that's more informed than the one I have now. Now, for the last melee character versus Game & Watch, I would honestly say that offstage is probably the worst thing for Sora to go for. If you've watched any top-level Game & Watch, you know just how bad Game & Watch's ledge trapping is for just about anyone who has to deal with it, and despite Sora's strong recovery, it doesn't really help him with getting off the ledge all that well. Sora can edgeguard Game & Watch better than a lot of other characters due to his ability to counter Game & Watch's up B, but I just don't think that equates to just the raw amount of damage that Game & Watch can get off of ledge traps, so I would still say I don't really want to be hanging out around the ledge in this matchup. Area control is the middle ground here. A lot of more traditional sorties would probably focus more on area control due to Game & Watch's lack of mobility and mid-range, but Sora's just not really fast enough, whether it be in just raw movement speed or frame data, to like space out Game & Watch in the way that a lot of other sorties can, but he can still do it well enough. The safety of the Game & Watch's moves, though, especially with their up B out of shield, makes it so that Sora can't really abuse his aerials in the ways that he would like to, so it tends to just kind of feel like a nothing burger in neutral a lot of the time. I believe that kill power is Sora's best option versus Game & Watch. It's not even because his combos are that good on Game & Watch. Like, the simple confirms are doable, but the longer combos are somewhat annoying due to the hurtbox and R.O.B having some weird frame hurtbox shifting stuff. But besides the fact that Game & Watch is just extremely light, he doesn't really have a lot of real kill confirms. Like, even watching like the best Game Watches in the world, like Mia and Meister, the way that they come across stocks is usually due to like a ledge trap or just getting a raw smash attack. They don't really have kill confirms, and none of their aerials are really just gonna kill outright from like center stage or something like that. Not that Sora should rush for taking stocks, it's just something that I feel should eventually happen as the game drags on, as long as Sora doesn't end up off stage too much. Alright, disclosure for this matchup, I would argue that I'm just straight up the most experienced in this matchup than Eddie Sora, because this was my previous main, and I've played probably like a dozen sets versus Bonk, and I've also practiced versus Show on occasion. So, pretty confident in this one, and the most obvious thing that Sora shouldn't be doing is going off stage. There are a handful of characters that I would say outright have a better recovery than Sora, and Meta Knight is one of them. Just way more mobility attached to the recovery moves themselves, a lot more mix-up potential, multiple jumps. Meta Knight is just very hard to both avoid off stage or to pin down in a way that really matters. Some Soras would probably argue that kill power is the worst thing Sora can be going for because, you know, Meta Knight, it can get the ladders on Sora because he's light and floaty and he might just die to them. And that does sometimes just happen. But, like, if he doesn't get the ladder, Sora's not really gonna die before, like, 110 or 120%. I think Sora is actually way better at taking stocks on, like, the average case, like you know, like, middle percents to even, like, somewhat high percents. But, like, I will admit that the ladders are just so deadly on Sora in particular. I think it's enough to make this category even. But I'll be honest, I feel like this matchup kind of just exposes Soras that aren't good at comboing because, you know, if you're not matching Meta Knight in combo game, you are just going to get outpaced. Area control is definitely where Sora gets the most consistent mileage just because Meta Knight's effective range, even with his mobility advantage, is just really low. I also think it's important to note that Meta Knight's ground speed and how much he's looking for, like, dash attack and stuff like that makes it easier for Sora to land rising aerials like Nair, which in turn makes it easier for Sora to get kill confirms, which leads it back into that kill power middle ground. But above all else, I just think Meta Knight is stubby enough to where, with proper attentiveness, you can usually outpace him in the neutral department to the point where you'll rack up damage a normal way and just kind of succeed in that front. Pit is another matchup that I don't have a ton of data on, but if I had to pick the worst thing for Sora to focus on, it would likely be offstage. Pit's Guardian Orbiters makes it pretty annoying for Sora to edgeguard Pit in a way that matters, whereas Pit's multiple jumps and their very aimable arrows makes them very good at just kind of racking up damage on Sora offstage, even if he doesn't outright get the stock for it. Area control is a 50-50, Pit is faster and does have a more consistent projectile, but I don't find his arrows to be that threatening in neutral in particular. I also just find Sora's hitboxes to gain more damage for him on average than Pit's, so that just kind of tends to go back and forth in the limited experience that I have in the matchup. I think Sora takes the kill power category the hardest for the simple reason of Pit just doesn't really have an X factor, so to speak. Like, he has some decent combos, don't get me wrong, and Sora's pretty light, but he just doesn't really have anything to the level of Sora's combo game, and he doesn't have any, like, combo breaking tools to really deal with it. Now, Dark Pit's only real difference between Pit is his different arrow, but believe it or not, I do think it is enough to change the matchup somewhat. Not in the kill power department, though, that is still mostly the same. I think, again, Sora's X Factor is just way stronger than anything that Dark Pit consistently has, so I still think Sora takes kill power for basically the same reasons I said for Pit. The real difference is that I find Dark Pit's arrows to be not as good for him for edge guarding, but way better for him in just the general neutral game and controlling space. Unlike Pit's arrows, Dark Pit's arrows apply much more consistent knockback and damage to the point where Sora will get pelted a lot trying to simply get in, which in my opinion makes it a lot easier for Dark Pit to play a more just outright campy game as opposed to Pit. His inability to aim the arrows, though, makes them a lot less threatening offstage. Usually Sora can just counter them on reaction, so I think offstage isn't as bad of a place for Sora to be. but area control feels worse enough to where I did feel the need to separate Dark Pit and Pit for this video. On to Zero Suit Samus, I'm just going to start what I think to be the most obvious category. Sora is not controlling space in this matchup very often in a way that matters. The combination of ZSS's mobility, Zair, and just fast frame data, it's really hard for Sora to play neutral in a way that doesn't just feel like he's just throwing out stuff and hoping it works. The persistence of Sora's hitboxes and Sora's ability to crouch under things like Zair does help, but I mean, come on. Like, I don't think anyone sane is going to try to argue that ZSS doesn't generally win neutral in this matchup. Offstage is a 50-50. ZSS still is very fast in the air, but her recovery can be a little fragile at times due to how much it relies on her having flip jump at the ready. If she uses flip jump and gets hit after it, Sora can usually checkmate a stock out, and although she is way faster, it's actually a little hard for her to consistently edgeguard Sora just because a lot of her hitboxes are pretty precise in a way that if the Sora just plays preemptively and uses stuff like up air and counter, it can be difficult for her to consistently net stocks. I would say both characters are pretty good at avoiding the other offstage, but will occasionally get gimped every now and then. Kill power is where I think Sora gets the most mileage in the matchup. ZSS just does not really have many good kill options. Very few of her moves are just gonna kill outright, and a lot of her combos are pretty situational and very DI-able if you know what to do. Her frame 2 air dodge makes combos on her harder to do at the start of stocks, but again, because ZSS has a hard time closing out stocks, Sora is usually living to the rage where he's able to just do the combos anyways. On to Wario, I think Sora loses the area control category the most, for the main reason being that he doesn't really gain much from camping Wario for too long, because if you sit around, Wario gets waft, and you really don't want Wario to have waft at any point. Wario's aerial speed in particular can make it very hard for Sora to track him down, especially if you leave open big stages like PS2 or something like that. I would say Sora and Wario are both pretty good at edgeguarding each other off stage. Wario's recovery can be very hard to deal with if he has Bike, but if he doesn't have Bike, he's basically one counter away from just dying. And Wario himself is pretty good at edgeguarding Sora with stuff like down air and back air. I think that's a pretty even category. This leaves kill power as Sora's best bet, which might surprise you because I just talked about how threatening waft is. But the reality is that if Wario doesn't have waft, it's pretty easy to avoid dying to him as long as you don't get hit by like a down tilt combo or just a random up smash out of shield. Whereas Sora always has his combos at the ready, and unless Wario has a bike that he can spit out in the middle of hit stun, he can just kind of die at any point. It's honestly the main reason why the matchup is winning, because yeah, Wario can stall out for waft, but all that time that he's stalling out, he can die in the same way. And even when he does get waft, he can still die because Sora's combos aren't going anywhere. For the sake of this video's consistency, I am going to try to be as optimistic as possible for Sora's best bet, but just know it's his best bet in the sense of this is the one thing he doesn't absolutely lose in, and that's an offstage. Snake usually has to rely on high recoveries, but Sora's juggling is very strong between his up air and also just using spells and Sonic Blade to cover more horizontal distance landings. So Sora can usually apply some pretty good pressure in offstage situations. Again, I don't even think Sora dominates in this category because we're still talking about a character who can just set out the beep beep boop Nikita and just chase Sora off stage, let alone all of the C4 and grenade setups. But out of these three categories, I definitely feel like this is the one where if I'm beating a Snake, it's usually because of something I'm abusing with them being off stage or having to land from high recovery. Area control is the middle ground in this matchup. Neither character really is that good at approaching the other if they have to. I mean, Sora's mobility makes it pretty hard for him to get around Snake's grenades if he's just actively trying to run into Snake. C4 can make that even worse. But I am willing to admit that Snake, in situations where he does have to approach, can have a hard time getting around Sora's spells and mid-range. The worst thing for Sora to do, though, is to try to take stocks at earlier percents in Snakes. It's not happening for multiple reasons. Sora's combos don't work as well because Snake has frame 1 grenades. Sora's normal, simpler confirms aren't going to kill as early because Snake is one of the heaviest characters in the game, all while Snake has a multitude of setups and weird grenade combos that'll just destroy Sora's stock at basically any point if he's not careful. It's hard to rage bait a character like Snake into going off stage, but You kind of just have to play out the long game to an extent, but not too long to where you're just getting whittled down and dying. You want to try and force Snake off stage so that you can put him in those awkward recovery situations and rack up damage in that way. That's usually how you'll beat this character. Another matchup that doesn't happen at top level all that much, but I don't think it's that hard to explain. We'll start with area control. I mean, both characters just want to land their mid-range nairs, but the reason why I think Sora has an advantage is because, unlike Ike, Sora actually has projectiles to mix up his effective range a little bit. Ike is faster in the air, but he kind of has a similar problem to Roy, where like his air acceleration is too bad for him to actually abuse that mobility in a way that matters a lot in neutral. Kill power goes both ways. Sometimes Sora will just die to an Ike nair combo at 40, sometimes Ike will just get wobbled by Sora's combos at like 30. I don't know. It's kind of like a theory versus in practice thing. You could argue this skews more towards Sora at top level, but I mean, good luck finding matchups, this matchup being played at top level. Off stage is where I think Sora is least effective in this matchup, which might not make a lot of sense to you because on paper, Sora's recovery is a lot more varied and just better than Ike's, but despite the simplicity of Ike's recovery, there's not a whole lot Sora can do about it in certain situations. But above all else, even if Sora makes it back to the ledge, getting off of the ledge versus Ike sucks, man. Like, Sora will just randomly die to, like, F-tilt, combos into back air, and don't even, like, even going back to, like, edge-guarding Ike back, like, dealing with the Aether at the ledge. I usually find that if I'm losing this matchup, it's almost always because I'm trying to get more damage off stage than I reliably can actually land. Alright, Pokémon Trainer is a 3-in-1 package, but despite there being 3 different Pokémon, I feel like Sora's game plan doesn't change too much, all things considered. I would say area control is Sora's best bet on average. Squirtle is very fast and has a small hurt box, but he's also extremely stubby. Charizard has better range and is also pretty fast in his own right, but he's just so big and kind of slow in the air, it makes him hard to get around spells. Ivysaur is usually Pokemon Trainer's best option in area control, but even then, like, at worst, it's like an even matchup in that category. Offstage is 50-50, neither character really wants to be offstage. Sora can edgeguard all 3 of the Pokemon pretty well. Sora doesn't really want to be offstage versus any of the 3 Pokemon all that much because, I mean, Squirtle can use Water Gun to troll him offstage. Ivysaur has down air and combos in Divine Whip. Charizard has things like back air and just really scary ledge trapping with F-tilt and stuff like that. Neither character really wants to be on the ledge. Kill power on average is a thing that Sora struggles the most with. You know, obviously Squirtle isn't great at it, but like if Sora's a kill percent, they'll just go to Ivysaur or Charizard, and both of those Pokemon are very good at just randomly stealing Sora's stock. They also have some decent combo breaking tools mentioned on the bottom of the slide, but above all else, I just find that Ivysaur and Charizard are just a lot better at just kind of finding stocks in random situations as opposed to Sora in the matchup. On to Diddy Kong. Now, the way that Diddy Kong generally beats a lot of sword characters is just by controlling space with Banana and stuff like that, so you would think that area control would be the worst option here, but I actually think it's a little more comparable just because of how active Sora's hitboxes are and Sora having his own projectiles and his spells. You could argue that Diddy Kong still wins the area control debate due to his mobility, and I would agree with you. I just don't think the gap is as big as how hard Diddy Kong tends to dominate in off-stage interactions. Diddy Kong is very good at edgeguarding Sora in my opinion with banana setups into down air, and I just don't think it's really possible for Sora to edgeguard Diddy Kong without getting an outright hard read. He's just too fast for Sora to catch in the air a lot of the time. Kill power is for sure Sora's best bet in the matchup, besides the fact that his combos are pretty good on Diddy Kong, just even with Diddy Kong's frame to air dodge. Diddy Kong just doesn't really have a ton of super devastating kill confirms. He kind of has to whittle down his opponent and then eventually link into like an up smash or something like that, which is pretty powerful, but you know, it just doesn't really match the type of damage output that Sora can do. Neutral is very annoying in this matchup, but I find that Sora's best bet versus Diddy Kong is usually to just kind of stick out the patient neutral, take the damage that comes with it, but really just take advantage of those situations where he does get an opening, because when he does, Diddy Kong can often die at much earlier percents, and it's something that Diddy Kong really has to respect a lot of the time. Okay, full disclaimer of Lucas, I have practiced this matchup a decent amount at top level, but You could order these categories in a lot of different ways, and I probably agree with you. If I had to pick the best thing Sora is good at, though, I think it's in the area control department. Sora's mid-range is just really devastating for Lucas to deal with, and like, I don't think Lucas's up-close game is strong enough to make up for it in the same way that Ness's does. In particular, Lucas's lack of a threatening out of shield makes it really easy for Sora to kind of just mash and get away with it. Kill power is in the middle for me. I mean, like, both characters are potential men. They both might kill each other at 0. They both might drop their combos and take their stocks like 130 or 140. I don't really know. Like, it requires a certain level of caution from both ends. I don't think either side really wants to entirely focus on that aspect, though. So, surprisingly, that leaves offstage as the least relevant thing for Sora to focus on. To be clear, Sora can definitely still edgeguard the character, like you can still counter the up B, they're still pretty floaty in the air, but there are a couple key reasons why I find Lucas to be much harder to deal with on average than Ness offstage. Lucas isn't as trivial to edgeguard because he has a tether recovery, which is pretty hard for Sora to deal with on reaction, and even if Sora counters Lucas's up B, because the upbeats like the PK Thunder 2 is a multi-hit, it doesn't actually kill Lucas immediately, so he's just going to have another attempt at recovering a lot of the time. Again, like, Sora can still do it, it's just not a checkmate in the way that it is versus Ness. I also find Lucas to be weirdly scary to deal with when trying to recover as Sora, because they have multiple spikes that can hit Sora off stage. PK Freeze is a much more consistent and deadlier option, just due to how fast it is and how much more space it can cover. Down Smash can be annoying. PK Fire has a really high base knockback, so if you get hit by it off stage, Sora might just die at like 70. I just think Lucas has a much more complete package off stage. I wouldn't even say that Sora loses this category, but if I had to pick one that is like the least effective and you'll probably lose for focusing too much on it, I would say it's off stage. I definitely don't think you should, I don't think you should focus on throwing Lucas off stage as much as you would for Ness, even if it's something where you might occasionally get mileage out of it. Now, judging by the fact that my categories have very clearly taken inspiration from Sonic Heroes, you probably would assume that Sonic's category and area control will be the thing that he's best at in a matchup, but I would have to disagree here. It's certainly still a pretty solid option for Sonic. He is cartoonishly faster and can often check Sora a lot of the times if you're just mashing willy-nilly with stuff like homing attack. But Sonic just has a really hard time engaging in trades with Sora due to how active Sora's hitboxes are. Combined with Sora's spells giving him some options at long range, and Sora having some weird but actually effective ways of dealing with spin dash, whether it be countering it, dash attack, Faraga, even down smash sometimes. Again, I don't think Sora wins this category by any means, but I don't think it's something that Sonic can really just, hard focus on from the get-go. Where I actually think Sonic gets the most mileage in this matchup is in the offstage game. Sora has a really hard time avoiding Sonic offstage due to how much space he can quickly cover, whereas Sora can't really edgeguard Sonic as well due to how fast Sonic can move and the fact that, counter doesn't really do anything because by the time Sonic leaves the spring back, he's already going to be in the air, right? You're not going to counter him jumping off of the spring. So you kind of just have to edgeguard him the old-fashioned way, and with how fast Sonic is, it's not very practical. Additionally, ledge trapping is usually where Sonic will net his most consistent kills, whether it be an F smash at the ledge, landing a falling there into a back air, or even just a run-off forward air off stage. Despite the fact that Sora usually likes being off stage, I find that whenever I lose to this character, it's usually because I get hit off stage in a weird way, and then I just kind of keep taking damage until I die. Kill power is definitely Sora's best bet in my opinion. Sonic just doesn't really have kill confirms on the level of Sora's. Even though both sides can rack up damage pretty well, Sora can usually live to weirdly high percents despite his low weight just by not jumping into Sonic. Unless you get hit by a dash back F smash or an up smash out of shield if you're being a little too hasty, you're probably living versus this character till 120 or even 130 nearly every stock, assuming you don't end up off stage too much, which is why I put off stage as the worst category. Sora really should not be losing this matchup all that often, but if he is losing to King Dedede, it is almost certainly because he finds himself off stage too much, making it the worst category for the matchup. It's not that Sora can't edgeguard Dedede, I have done it multiple times, it's just that Dedede can not only edgeguard Sora, but his ledge trapping is probably the most notorious aspect of the entire character. So, like, yeah, you could jump off stage and edgeguard Dedede, but is that really worth potentially giving him his own ledge trap, which is his entire win con? Usually it's not. Area control is the middle ground in the matchup. Sora is faster and his spells beat Dedede's Gordo, but Dedede's hammer is usually either as big as Sora's aerials, or just flat out bigger. And Dedede's multiple jumps and the way he just kind of stalls in the air can be weirdly annoying for Sora to deal with, just because of how unconventional Sora's double jump is. It really is more of a commitment for him to just jump up and try and hit Dedede there, as opposed to the average character. So, the pretty clear win con for Sora in this matchup is kill power. This character can die at any percent of Sora's combos. He doesn't have any real combo breaking tools. His hurt box is huge. His air dodge is frame 4. And unlike some other previous super heavies, he doesn't really have a ton of ways to just randomly take stocks on his own in a way that can match what Sora can do to him. It's not like Donkey Kong or Ganondorf, because those characters actually have pretty consistent ways to just randomly delete stocks. Even Dedede, with his very high weight, usually has to work a little harder to come across stocks unless the Sora is just jumping into their up smashes or back airs. Olimar. This is another matchup you're not going to see that often because there aren't a whole lot of Olimars, and the best one in the world would just go Aegis versus Sora. But if you happen to find a good Olimar, the thing I don't recommend you go for too much is combos. Olimar is very light, to be fair, but his hurt box is super small, and he has a frame 2 escape with his whistle armor, so it's just really annoying trying to combo him more often than not. There's also the fact that Olimar also just does a lot of damage output on his own right, between just up smash combos and purple Pikmin just being an absolute menace, combined with him having the blue Pikmin to land grabs that might just kill Sora at 110. Usually Olimar is outpacing Sora in the kill power department. Area control is more of a 50-50, which might surprise you considering that Olimar's whole thing is running away and throwing Pikmin at you, but despite the fact that Olimar is way faster and can run away and throw Pikmin, Sora is very good at dealing with the Pikmin. His aerials are just big enough to where they usually will just whack the Pikmin around him, and if you're good enough to do IDJ Nair just on a whim, you can actually IDJ Nair Pikmin that land in front of you on the ground, including the purple Pikmin, so you can take them out in that way. So although Olimar is really good at running away, Sora is really good at dealing with the things he's throwing at Sora, so it tends to just be a bit of a stalemate. I would say that offstage is definitely where Sora gets the most mileage in this matchup. It's not that Olimar can't edgeguard Sora, I actually think he's pretty decent at it. I just find Olimar's recovery in particular to be very flawed. The problem is that he has to trade between either having a lot of Pikmin on him to defend himself, but the recovery itself not covering a lot of space, or his recovery does cover a lot of space, but he has to throw all of his Pikmin, which he won't get back until he goes back to the stage to pluck them. So regardless, Sora usually has a pretty easy time just kind of pressuring Olimar off stage and really just making it annoying for him to recuperate once he makes it back on. Another matchup you're not going to see all that often. Versus Lucario, I would say area control is the worst thing for Sora to focus on, because he just doesn't really have the mobility to keep Lucario in check in a way that matters. Aura Sphere is also a much more consistent projectile for Lucario and only becomes more and more deadlier the longer Sora lets neutral play out. For offstage, I think Sora can edgeguard Lucario pretty well because he's not that great at defending himself offstage, but I don't like recovering versus Lucario, not really because of the actual recovery part. It's more of getting off of the ledge that sucks, because the Aura Spear confirms whether it be Aura Spear into back air, it could just be a raw Aura Spear if you have enough aura. There's just a lot of ways for Sora to just kind of get stuck at the ledge, so you know, it's you kind of have to feel that out. Neither character really wants to be on the receiving end of a ledge trap here or an edge guard, so not to say you should avoid going off stage, but I wouldn't necessarily focus on it too much. Kill power is Sora's best bet in the matchup, which may seem surprising because a lot of the clips you'll see of Lucario doing well in a tournament is because he gets some crazy low percent stock off of high aura. but in order for him to have high aura, he has to live for a while himself, and Sora's combos can usually ensure that that doesn't happen on average. Lucario can't rely on his high aura kill confirms and combos as much because he has to worry about not getting comboed himself at mid% and dying before he even gets that much aura. Versus R.O.B, I think a lot of people tend to tunnel vision on Sora's combo game being the main thing he does in the matchup, and don't get me wrong, it does help a lot, but like it's R.O.B we're talking about, and Sora is light. Like Sora can die at early percents in a pretty similar fashion to R.O.B dying to Sora's combos. Where I think Sora actually gets the most mileage in the matchup is in area control, which might not make sense on paper because R.O.B's laser and gyro cover way more space, but Sora's counter is just really good at allowing him to avoid laser without taking the shield damage, and not only avoid gyro, but make it his own, so now R.O.B has to move around his own gyro. Combined with R.O.B's hurtbox making it hard for him to avoid Sora's hitboxes and spells, and Sora's counter also being good versus R.O.B's landing nairs, and the real problem for R.O.B isn't really in terms of taking stocks, it's more of like actually getting good hits in neutral without putting himself at too much risk. Now, as for the worst thing for Sora to focus on, it is certainly offstage. I think basically every set I have lost to a R.O.B before, it has involved me dying offstage at some obscene percents. Sora can edgeguard R.O.B at times, but R.O.B's aerial mobility, especially with his mix-ups of how he uses his up B, it's just way more versatile and harder for Sora to avoid on average. The main issue is how many options R.O.B can cover. He can cover in front of himself with laser and gyro, forward air, maybe even a back air. He can cover below him with down air. If you recover high, now you're risking getting up aired. And even if you make it to the ledge, now you're dealing with gyro setups, back air, down smash, all that stuff. I really feel like Sora does not want to be messing around off stage too much, even though there are times where you may be able to edgeguard R.O.B back. The third link in a roster, and another link where I think Sora's win cons differ slightly compared to the other two. Something that is shared with Young Link is that area control is for sure Sora's worst category in the matchup. Besides Toon Link's assortment of projectiles, he's also just way faster, especially on the ground, to the point where it's just really hard for Sora to catch up with Toon Link in a way that doesn't put him in danger a lot of times. A lot of characters' counterplay to Toon Link is, oh, just shield if he has a bad grab and he's trying to throw items at you, but Sora just does not have the mobility to just run up and shield in a way that's actually going to land him a lot of hits. Offstage is the middle ground in my opinion. Both characters are pretty threatening offstage. Like, Sora can just cover a lot of space with his aerials and spells. Toon Link has bomb into fair confirms, landing his up B, and both characters are pretty floaty, so that makes them adept at chasing each other off stage depending on who is advantaged or disadvantaged. Kill power is where I think Sora gets the most mileage versus Toon Link. And it's not because Sora's combos are super good on Toon Link, they're actually a little annoying due to Toon Link's frame 2 air dodge, but Toon Link kind of just wants one thing. He really wants to hit you with a bomb. If you just play to avoid bomb, you can usually manage to not die versus Toon Link any earlier than like 110%. And again, I don't think Sora's combos are super potent on Toon Links, but I do think they have the potential to take sub 100% stocks way more often than what Toon Link is generally lining up. Last Brawl character and last Spacey, I think our win con versus Wolf is much more similar to Fox than it is to Falco. Wolf's recovery is notoriously fragile. It doesn't really matter what percent he's at. If he air dodges in a weird way, if he gets hit by forward air in a weird way, he can just die at any point. Admittedly, Wolf does have some pretty threatening ledge trapping of his own, but again, I just don't think that really stacks up to the potential for Wolf to just die at any percent off stage. Like, at least if Sora dies off stage just because he was already around kill percent most likely, Wolf has to fear being off stage at every point in the match. Kill power is in the middle for this matchup because I actually don't think either character is that great at consistently finding early stocks in the matchup. Wolf is relatively hard to combo and also doesn't even have as low of a weight as the other two Spaceys, but on the other side of the coin, I feel like Wolf's kill confirms are a lot more, like, obvious is the word. I feel like if you play to just not get hit by certain things, you'll just kind of live for a while, even if it feels like nothing's really happening. So neither character is really that strong at taking stocks. Not bad per se, but I don't think it's to the point where it's really a consistent win con for either side. The space where Sora definitely loses the most in is area control. I would argue even worse than it is versus Fox. I think Wolf's kit is just extremely adept at dealing with a lot of Sora's options on reaction, whether it be laser beating out a lot of Sora's spells, Wolf's frame data and aerial mobility, especially the air drift, just allowing him to weave around Sora's aerials a lot. This really is a matchup where you kind of have to play to try to scare the Wolf and cheese them at all times, because at any point, if you're trying to play the honest, drawn-out neutral game with them, you're going to lose it almost every time, I promise you. For Villager, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that Sora's definitely better in kill power, but it's not because of Sora's combos being that powerful on Villager. They're actually kind of finicky. It's more so about Villager himself just having a hard time taking stocks. Doesn't really have a whole lot of kill confirms. He's just pretty bad at scrapping in general. So I feel like a lot of the time, like even if you aren't landing longer combos, you're just gonna have an easier time taking stocks just off of having basic confirms and larger hitboxes in those scrappy situations. I feel like it's just hard for Villager to force stocks on stage. Area control is in the middle because although Villager very clearly has the better zoning tools between like his slingshot and void rocket, and his timber does open up some interesting setups on like in neutral and whatnot, I just don't think he's good enough at scrapping, nor is he fast enough to strictly stay away for him to dominate this category as much as his archetype would imply. I would say off stage is where Villager actually gets the most mileage in the matchup and where Sora should try to stay away from, because Villagers has a lot of ways to pressure Sora off stage. It doesn't really put himself into immediate danger, whether it be like timber setups, bowling ball, well-placed like slingshots and void rockets. There's a lot of ways for Villager to edgeguard Sora that don't put him in any immediate risk. And combine that with the fact that I just think Villager's balloon trip is just pretty hard for Sora to track due to his lack of mobility. I don't see much of a reason to be off stage very much in this matchup. It's another matchup you're not going to see very often, but in my head, and from what I've played versus like Pokémon before and stuff like that, I think this is a matchup where Sora kind of just wants to play somewhat slow, but still kind of abusing his ability to accelerate stocks when necessary, not focusing too much on trying to cheese off stage or anything, because usually he'll just get reversaled or put himself in a bad situation. Mega Man Sora is funny because it's a matchup I feel like you don't see too much at top level, but I in particular have a lot of experience in it. But I don't think you need a lot of experience to say for certain that area control is the worst thing Sora can go for in this matchup. Mega Man's way better at long range, he's faster, he has decent options out of shield. There's just not really many situations where Sora can control space in a way that Mega Man can't immediately answer for. Like, obviously Sora's mid-range is kind of annoying for Mega Man, but again, like, he has the out of shield to pressure Sora if he gets too close, he has the range to just kind of go away and do something else. Now, I used to actually think that offstage might have been a worse category, just because of how Mega Man can edgeguard with like down air and ledge trap or forward smash in ways that don't put him in much immediate risk. But I feel like Sora's weirdly good at edgeguarding Mega Man because like the mix-ups he gets out of being able to like jump out of up B doesn't really help him versus Sora, because Sora just kind of wants to cover a general space, and regardless of when exactly Mega Man is up being, because that's his only recovery move, you can usually predict where he wants to end up and get a lot of damage or even a stock for it at times. Kill power is where I think Sora gets the most mileage, and it's not even because I think Mega Man's bad at killing or anything. I mean, he's still really heavy, and a lot of like the top Mega Mans, including ones that I fought before, like when you have the execution, they can definitely take Sora's stock at like 90 or 100. But Mega Man is just really susceptible to Sora's combos. He has the perfect properties. They both get hit by like R's Arcanum and just get hit by like basic drag downs to the down tilt, to where if you get the right opening, this character can just die at like 40 or something like that. This is definitely a matchup where I feel like you're going to struggle a lot if you don't have the combos on hand, but if you do, you can kind of play with a sense of kind of like recklessness. No, maybe not recklessness, but like an aggression, knowing that you really only need 1 or 2 openings to make up for all that damage you're taking from pellets and Metal Blade and whatnot. For Wii Fit, I honestly went back and forth on whether area control or kill power is more relevant, but offstage being the worst was pretty obvious from the start. Wii Fit is kind of notorious for living at the ledge, and even trying to edgeguard them can be pretty annoying. They also have a lot of spikes to kill Sora if they have to recover in a weird way, and their header, their side B, is really good at pressuring Sora in a way that forces him to react that doesn't put Wii Fit in any immediate danger. Kill power goes both ways. It's sort of just like a red light, green light situation. When Wii Fit has deep breathing, they're a monster that can kill Sora at like 40. When Wii Fit doesn't have deep breathing, they are heavily outpaced by basically any of Sora's confirms, even the pretty simple ones. It does help that Sora is still capable of comboing deep breathing Wii Fit, but I really do not recommend fishing for it that much. You're just way faster and too threatening in a lot of scenarios for it to be really worth it. I believe that area control is Sora's best bet in a matchup because, for one, a lot of Wii Fit's hitboxes are just really weird and not effective versus what Sora has going on of his aerials. Whether it be Wii Fit trying to land, trying to consistently hit Sora out of shield, like, there are just too many areas where Sora can get away with just covering space with little risk. She's very fast on the ground, but I don't think her grounded moves are good enough for that to really matter. And she has debatably better projectiles, but they're not too hard to just kind of counter on reaction, especially header. So in reality, it's not that hard to approach her, and at mid-range, she just kind of gets stomped, in my opinion. Versus Rosalina and Luma, I feel like whenever I lose this matchup, it's almost certainly due to something happening offstage. The combination of Rosalina's mobility and the amount of space that Luma can cover makes it pretty hard for Sora to recover comfortably in this matchup. It's also pretty hard for Sora to edgeguard Rosalina consistently. Like, I have done it on occasion, but just the raw speed of her recovery and the fact that if she has Luma with her, she can cover herself with Luma. I feel like the risk reward is just generally not in Sora's favor, trying to jump off and pressure her there. Area control is more of a 50-50 because although Rosalina is still very fast, and although Luma can cover a lot of space separate from Rosalina, because Sora isn't as worried about recovering, he can spend more time just throwing out hitboxes for the sake of dealing with Luma, and it's pretty hard for Luma to navigate around them. I hear a lot of differing opinions regarding like just how good Rosalina is at keeping out Sora, how good Sora is at just mashing through it all. In my experience, I don't think area control is a particularly strong point for either character in a matchup. It really is depending on just like who is winning at the moment. Kill power is where I think Sora has an easier time because although Rosalina has some pretty crazy confirms with Luma, it's just not that hard for Sora to just focus on removing Luma, and then once Luma is gone, he's just winning every single trade for the next like 10 seconds or however long Luma is gone. Combined with Rosalina herself being as light and floaty as Sora, I think she's even lighter. It's just very hard for her to avoid exploding in those moments where she doesn't have Luma to protect her, in my opinion. For Little Mac, let's just get the easy one out of the way. Obviously, offstage is our #1 thing, but I do want to stress some nuance here. Despite the fact that I think offstage is Sora's best bet, I don't really recommend him to plank or anything because Little Mac has a lot of scary things he can do at the ledge, mainly like down tilt into jump haymaker. Sora can just explode at like 70 or 80%. Despite that possibility, the potential for Sora to just throw Little Mac off stage, get one good counter, one good dash attack, and they die at basically any percent does pretty clearly outweigh that risk at the ledge, but I guess this is my way of saying focus on converting your neutral wins into throwing Little Mac off stage. Don't just camp the ledge, because odds are you're putting yourself at a pretty big risk despite the fact that Little Mac is so bad off stage. Area control is a 50-50 because although Sora has the range advantage and a lot of Little Mac's moves, I think basically all of them are punishable by up B out of shield, he's just comically faster to the point where just his ability to weave in and out and make the Sora throw out moves that they shouldn't, armor through like weaker Sora hits, in practice it feels a lot more even than what the effective range gap would imply. And on-stage kill power is for sure Sora's least relevant point. I mean, we're talking about a character with some of the best smash attacks in the game, KO punch, and above all else, multiple ways to frame one escape out of Sora's combos, usually by their neutral B armor, but sometimes if they're feeling ballsy, they might just up B you and you could die that way. I also should mention, like, a lot of the better Little Macs will have, like, the up tilt into up B confirms, and Sora is very susceptible to that due to how light he is. So yeah, don't focus too much on trying to outpace him stock-wise on stage. It's not really going to happen. You know, despite having a decent amount of practice versus Greninja, I'm actually not that confident in the ordering of these categories. But if I had to pick the least relevant thing for Sora to worry about in this matchup, or not worry about, but to focus on in this matchup, I would say offstage is a weak point. Greninja has a ton of airspeed, has water shurikens to pressure Sora with little risk. He can land things like forward air, back air. Hydro Pump can be really annoying for Sora to edgeguard versus. The really good Greninjas might line up a Shadow Sneak and you could just explode at 50. He just has a lot of different ways to pressure Sora off stage. You can't reliably avoid all of them. You kind of just have to hope you're right a lot of the time. Additionally, I personally have a pretty difficult time edgeguarding Greninja consistently. There are some edge case moments where I land a forward air or a jab and they just fall down immediately and I cheese them that way. But I feel like once the Greninja gets past that cheese barrier, it's a lot easier for them to just kind of weave around Sora's lack of mobility, as opposed to Sora trying to go around all the ways Greninja can cover space off stage. Area control is the middle category. Greninja is way faster and has ways to pressure from a distance like Water Shuriken, Hydro Pump low-key, Forward Air is just a really good move. But I think the main weakness of Greninja that really hurts him a lot in this matchup, and it's kind of come back in that kill power category, is his out of shield is one of the worst in the entire game. Part of the reason why a character like Fox wins area control is because he's not only very fast, but he also has good enough out of shield to stop Sora from just covering space willy-nilly. I don't think Greninja can do that. I think Greninja has to respect Sora more to a certain extent. It's also worth mentioning that although Greninja can cover more raw space, you're not really going to die for getting hit by like Water Shuriken or Hydro Pump as long as you're attentive, whereas Greninja does have to respect confirms out of Faraga. He has to respect getting hit by Thundaga. He has to respect Blizzaga because he might get up smash out of that. So there's a sense of there's a larger sense of threat from Sora's hitboxes in a way that kind of bridges the gap between just how much space Greninja can cover. This factors into why I think Sora takes the advantage in kill power out of the three categories, and it's just because of the fact that I just feel like Sora's kill confirms are easier to come by. Like, it's just a lot less risky for Sora to just kind of fish for a rising there, especially on a character that likes to like dash across the ground, as opposed to Greninja, who needs to land like a dash attack or a down tilt, both of which, to my knowledge, can be upbeat out of shield. And his confirms just tend to be pretty inconsistent. Like, we've seen it a million times at this point, like drag down to like up smash, and up smash doesn't work. Like, Greninja's just a lot more precise, I feel. At least in the context of this matchup when trying to link into specific confirms. So I think he has to play it a lot carefully in that regard. For Mii Brawler, I think the categories here are pretty obvious. I mean, we'll start with the easiest one. Sora is not outpacing Mii Brawler in kill power. It's a nasty combination of Sora being very susceptible to Mii Brawler's most basic combos, and Sora's longer combos just not really being as effective on Mii Brawler due to how fast they fall. Even if the Sora has R Solom on lock, I just think it's hard to fish for combos and kill confirms on this character just because their out of shield is so good. I mean, Thrust Overcut, if it doesn't kill you, it's still a frame 3 option to have at all times. I forget the exact frame of up smash, but it's a pretty strong move in and of itself. I just don't really think Sora gains much from trying to close out early stocks on stage, although, you know, it's possible. Area control is the middle ground. Sora has more effective range. Mii Brawler, though, is just a lot faster, way better at close range, and his out of shield keeps Sora in check from just throwing out hitboxes willy-nilly. Mii Brawler's offstage is definitely his most vulnerable point in the matchup because it's basically just a much worse version of ZSS's because, like, he has the flip kick or the feint jump or whatever, but if he loses the feint jump, he's basically a sitting duck and he doesn't have a tether to really mix up whether he's going to go for the feint jump or if he's going to tether. Like, he just kind of has to feint jump every time. With some well-placed dash attacks, counters, spells, forward air, back air, Sora can usually take Brawler stock pretty early off stage, so it turns into this cat and mouse where Brawler's just trying to murder Sora on stage, but whereas Sora is trying to bait Brawler off stage so they can kind of pull the rug under him. Full disclosure, I have no idea what is the optimal moveset for Mii Swordfighter, and depending on the moves that they pick, these categories could move around. I tried to average them, but I don't know, man, it's Mii Swordfighter. I would say that kill power is on average the worst thing Sora can worry about, and it's not because Mii Swordfighter has any real counterplay to Sora's combos. I just think down throw up air is just as deadly and way easier than realistically anything Sora can pull off. Obviously, if they have the woke nonsense hero spin combos, then this gap gets larger. Again, it's not that I haven't had games where I just kind of combo Mii Swordfighter anyways, but I feel like on average, I usually am at a worse position trying to cheese stocks off Mii Swordfighter than they are trying to cheese stocks off me. Off stage, I put in the middle. I'll be honest, again, like their recovery can change a lot based on whether they pick a side B that moves them or if they just pick Chrom, what exact up B they pick. I feel like, generally speaking, both characters are good enough at edge guarding each other to where I kind of just throw it in the middle. But again, like, you really kind of have to apply some discretion based on what the exact moveset they're using is. For area control, whether or not Mii Swordfighter actually picks 1 or 2 projectiles, I just think they're too slow for it to matter in a lot of situations. I don't find it to be that difficult to approach the character personally. You could argue that special move composition would move off stage above area control in certain situations, but I feel like Sora just outframe datas enough to where we usually just win the more patient game versus them. Usually when I lose to Swordfighter, it's because they're just kind of killing me outright with, you know, like down throw up air, maybe a hero spin thing. Very rarely do I feel like I have like a long drawn out game versus a Swordfighter and I lose. Last Mii here, I think area control being the least relevant thing is pretty obvious. Mii Gunner's whole thing is being nowhere near Sora and they are pretty good at doing that. Also, a lot of the lower level Mii Gunners are too grenade pilled to actually abuse this, but Laser Blades plus Absorbing Vortex basically means that Sora just cannot use spells ever. Like, the only Mii Gunner I've fought that really abused this is Kabidan Sito on Ryuga Cord. Hopefully they're the only one that realizes this. I think Sora's actually pretty decent at dealing with the charge shot and the grenade launcher, but Laser Blades just shuts down Sora in a way, like, if you are a gunner watching this video, please try it out versus Sora. They just cannot use Thundaga ever. Anyways, off stage is kind of a 50-50. I think Mii Gunner usually has to trade between either having a recovery that doesn't give them many options to fight back, or a recovery that has the hitbox but doesn't go very far or is very linear. So usually Sora can edge guard one way or the other. However, Mii Gunner at the ledge can be very strong. Like, they don't even need the neutral B grenade launcher. Just having the side B missiles plus the bomb drop on down B is usually enough to force Sora to have to do some awkward things to make it back. So neither character really wants to be off stage that much. Kill power, though, is pretty clearly where Sora takes the cake. I mean, I don't think I have seen a Mii Gunner hit a combo ever in any context. It's not that I think Sora's combos are particularly easy on Mii Gunner. They're average difficulty, but they're way more threatening than anything the Gunner can do. This matchup can feel a lot worse if you're not as strong in your combo game, but in my experience, it really doesn't matter how much damage the Gunner is doing to me. Somehow, someway, they are always at just as much, if not more, risk of losing their stock. Palutena, one of like the 3 normal characters they added in Smash 4. I would say that offstage is the worst aspect for Sora in the matchup. Sora can potentially 2-frame Palutena, but I just don't think the risk-reward on that matches just how good Palutena is at both edge guarding with things like back air and lining up a down air when Sora has to up B or side B. And their ledge trapping is also very strong. I mean, back air is still very good in that situation. Down tilt, up smash. It's just really hard for Sora to consistently get around all the space that Palutena can cover. Area control is more of a 50-50. Palutena is faster and technically can cover more distance with her projectiles, but the projectiles tend to be a lot more committal than what Sora can throw out, and Sora does have a pretty clear mid-range advantage outside of back air shielding through certain things. This matchup is kind of polarizing in that neither character is very strong at strictly approaching the other. I think you'll find that a lot of times this matchup will end in a 2-stock or a 3-stock just because if Sora has to approach, he's usually going to get walled by back air, and if Palutena has to approach, that means that she kind of has to make herself more susceptible to Sora's Nair and more threatening spells and stuff like that. Kill power is Sora's best bet despite the fact that he's noticeably lighter because Palutena lacks kill confirms in the same way that Sora does. A lot of her like stronger moves in general are just very committal. The only situation that I find that Sora dies relatively early in this matchup is if he gets caught in a bad chain of up airs and just dies at like 70 or 80. Outside of that though, as long as the Sora plays grounded and just lands their combos when they get the chance, He's usually outpacing on stage, it's more so getting caught too long off stage where Palutena tends to take the advantage. For Pac-Man, area control is definitely the worst thing Sora can be doing. I mean, Pac-Man's bonus fruit is just a much better tool than Sora's spells from a consistency standpoint, and even just a damage output one. Pac-Man is weirdly good at close range, has a pretty effective grab. Really the only spot that Sora can control is at mid-range, but it's just kind of hard for Sora to enforce that when Pac-Man is just so far ahead of Sora and basically every other range. Offstage is in the middle. Sora is one of the better characters at edgeguarding Pac-Man in my opinion, because he has the ability to wait out a lot of Pac-Man's stalling options, and counter is very strong against Pac-Man's power pellet. It can also help versus Pac-Man's trampoline if you line it up the right way. However, I don't really like being at the ledge versus Pac-Man due to his setups of Hydrant, potential Bell setups. Even getting hit by like Galaga combos off stage feels pretty icky. I don't think it's a matchup where either side really wants to be off stage that much. On stage kill power though is where I think Sora takes the cake, and this might not make a lot of intuitive sense due to how light Sora is, making him susceptible to like Bell F smash, and the fact that Sora's longer combos are pretty impractical on Pac-Man just due to the weird hurtbox inconsistencies. However, in my experience, even Sora's simpler confirms and just how fast it can rack up damage is usually better than Pac-Man's options. I feel like if I just play to not get hit by Bell, I am living past 115%, like 120% every stock versus Pac-Man. And for a character who's as light as Sora and gets boosted by Rage in terms of his own kill confirms, in my experience, Pac-Man is getting outpaced. I'm not saying that you should play this matchup blindly or anything, because, you know, just jumping into bonus fruit is how you actually do lose stocks to Pac-Man, but I do think Pac-Man is very clearly forced to play on more of his back foot and just kind of run away, which you can use to your advantage to make him end up in some uncomfortable decisions where he has to choose between potentially getting nared or getting juggled. Maybe he has to draw out his Hydra in a way that Sora can easily deal with. I feel like Sora has a fear factor in the matchup that Pac-Man just doesn't really have, as long as the Sora has basic confirms on lock. Alright, full disclosure for Robin, this is probably one of the least confident ones I had to do, because there's just not a whole lot of experience I have had at a high level, nor have I been able to find many VODs of this at a top level. So this is mostly just theory, and you could argue these categories go in different orders. But if I had to pick the best thing Sora has in the matchup, it's kill power. Robin certainly has ways to take Sora stocks early. Levin Sword is very devastating, and like arc fire combos can make that even worse. But the difference is Robin being able to kill in that manner is tied to a resource. Sora always has his combos on deck, so I feel like on average, Sora is better at taking stocks just because he doesn't have to rely on having a particular resource to line up certain things. Again, I don't think the gap here is huge because Sora is still very light, but if I had to pick something that I feel Sora would gain the most from focusing on, it would be that. Offstage is kind of bad for both sides. Robin doesn't like being offstage too much because their one recovery move is tied to a resource. Sora doesn't like being offstage that much because combos with like into like Levin Sword can be very devastating offstage. Getting off the ledge can be annoying. Again, all of this is tied to resources, but usually Robin has at least one resource to make offstage consistently annoying. So I would say neither side loves being on the receiving end of a ledge trap or a recovery. Area control is, in my opinion, the thing that Sora is the worst at. And this might not make a lot of sense considering what I've mentioned of Robin having to manage resources, so, you know, obviously that should mean that they can't just camp forever, right? However, a theme that's going to come back for some other matchups is that Sora struggles to deal with resource management characters to an extent because he just doesn't have the mobility to actually pressure the characters in the situations where they don't have that resource anymore. For Robin in particular, like, if they don't have the thunder spells, okay, well now they just use arc fire and throw out Levin Sword if you get too close. If they don't have Levin Sword, well guess what? Now they have thunder again, so they're just keeping you out until they just cycle back. By technicality, Sora can play out the long game because he's not going to run out of the resources, but I feel like he's getting out damage in the long run by doing that. I don't really think Sora gains much from trying to out-camp Robin or even just out-neutral him. It really does feel like a matchup where you want to use the fact that you always have the ability to kill Robin on hand and pressure off stage when you get reasonable chances to. For Shulk, I would say that area control is what Sora's best at, and this may not make a lot of sense to you because Shulk's sword is really big, and certain Monados can make Shulk very fast. However, although Shulk's sword is very big, it's also a lot of startup in a way that makes him hard to reactively contest with Sora's aerials unless he's just fishing for an air slash out of shield. In addition to that, he lacks any projectiles to deal with Sora's spells, and without speed art, he's also just kind of unremarkable in regards to his movement, and when he has speed art, it's pretty obvious what he's going for, so you kind of just hold shield, and I guess you might get like forward thrown or something, but usually it's not that hard to just play around when they have speed art, and when they don't have speed art, they're a lot easier to pin down in neutral. For Shulk, I would say shield art kind of limits the effectiveness of Sora's combos to an extent, but they're still entirely doable when he doesn't have shield art, and without smash art, I don't think Shulk is that good at taking stocks in a lot of situations. Very committal smash attacks. I know he has some combos of like jump art, but they are a lot harder to come by from my experience fighting good Shulks anyway, as opposed to Sora just finding one of his basic combo starters. Sora's lack of mobility does make it hard for him to force situations where Shulk doesn't have Monados, but I feel like the red light, green light nature is enough for me to put it in the middle regardless. Off stage is where I think Sora is at his worst in this matchup, which may surprise you because outside of jump Monado, Shulk's recovery is pretty normal as opposed to what Sora can do. It's less that Sora can't edgeguard Shulk and more of Shulk should be edgeguarding Sora. Sora just does not have the mobility to really move around Shulk's fair and down air without some really crazy mix-ups. And even if Sora makes it to the ledge, well, now you have to deal with back air, forward smash, and it all gets exponentially worse if they have smash art. To me, I've always felt like I've lost this matchup into situations where I get too hasty jumping off stage and then just kind of get caught in a ledge trap, and I'm most effective when I'm playing not necessarily in a slow manner, but in a patient enough manner to where I'm not throwing myself in bad situations and just kind of finding the stocks when I come across them. For Bowser Jr., another matchup where I think area control is definitely Sora's strong point. I think Bowser Jr. has a lot of bad nuances with their neutral game that Sora can abuse. A lot of caveats to Bowser Jr.'s game plan that I mentioned in the paragraph there. Really, it's just Sora has an easier time covering space and just kind of knocking Bowser Jr. out of his clown cart dash in a way that makes it hard for Jr. to maneuver around Sora safely. It really does just feel like a frame data and hitbox difference more than anything else. Like, in theory, Bowser Jr.'s kit should be fine versus Sora. I just think he kind of just gets outmashed in a lot of situations while not having the mobility to really work around it that well. Kill power is a 50-50. I think Sora's combos can be very strong against Bowser Jr., but I also think Bowser Jr. can kill Sora pretty early with, like, he has confirms with, like, we have, like, the clown cart jump into the up B hammer. Even without that, things like up smash out of shields, just raw back airs, I think the weight gap is enough to put kill power in the middle in spite of Sora's combos being pretty effective on Junior. Off stage is definitely where I think Sora gains the least in the matchup. I think Junior's ledge traps can be very scary, and I also find Junior to just be kind of hard for Sora to consistently edgeguard due to how fast Koopa Clown Car is. I know I said in the area control section that Sora is pretty good at dealing with it, but that's specifically in the situations where he has ground to land with aerials on. He doesn't have that safety when he's already off stage. I'm pretty sure at least half of the stocks I've lost in this matchup are me going for an edge guard, missing it, and then just getting stuck at the ledge or getting hit by like a clown car off stage or a back air off stage. This really does feel like kind of similar to Shulk, a matchup where you sort of just want to play it out, find stocks where you can, but really just abuse the fact that Junior generally has to put in more effort to find hits on stage. Don't bail them out by jumping off too much off stage. For Duck Hunt, I don't think I really need to explain why area control is Sora's worst thing here. They're one of the most notorious zoners in the entire game, and they're also fast enough to actually run away from Sora in a way that a lot of other zoners can't do as effectively. Sora's mid-range can definitely still be effective versus Duck Hunt in certain situations, but on average, I think Duck Hunt just has too many options at long range and is weirdly good enough at close range to where Sora just does not gain much from trying to control space more than they are. Kill power is in the middle in my opinion. Both characters are very light, so even if neither side is landing any of their crazy confirms, they have to respect each other's basic kill moves a lot of the time. You could argue that Duck Hunt takes a slight advantage here, depending on how high you value their frame 1 escape, but unlike a lot of other frame 1 escapes, their can actively puts them in danger. And because there's not a weight gap in the same way there is versus Sora and Snake, I think Sora can afford to just kind of take the can trades a lot of the time and still gets a stock out of it in a lot of situations. So I would say they're even in this category. Off stage is definitely where I think Sora gets the most mileage versus Duck Hunt. It's less of Duck Hunt not being good at ledge trapping and more of Duck Hunt's recovery just being bad enough to where I feel like Sora should be getting a lot of consistent damage when Duck Hunt does have to go off stage. Duck Hunt's recovery is very linear, generally relying on using their can to cover their recovery, but Sora's hitboxes are so big, I usually find that like between just throwing out aerials and spells that I can kind of just cover both Trick Shot and Duck Hunt themselves without putting myself in much immediate danger. In my opinion, you really have to use the fact that Duck Hunt doesn't want to be off stage to actually force them to take risks when they're across the stage near the ledge, because otherwise they would just kind of sit there and throw cans and frisbees at you until you die, because you're just not reasonably going to outstall all the options that they have. Versus Ryu, I would definitely say that kill power is the worst thing Sora can focus on in the matchup. Focus armor makes Sora's combos a lot less consistent, Ryu is way heavier, and Sora himself is very susceptible to Ryu's confirms in the Shoryuken, and even like Tatsu and stuff like that, just because Sora is very light. For area control, I think it's about even. You could argue Sora has the effective range advantage due to his mid-range and his spells being more varied, but I would argue Ryu's Shaco Hadoken is honestly a tool that's just as good, if not better, than all of Sora's spells combined, and that along with just how much better he is at close range means that usually neither character is outpacing each other that much in regarding controlling space. What Sora actually wants to focus on in the matchup is offstage. All of Ryu's recovery moves put him in a lot of risk because both side B and up B are counterable, and if Sora counters either of those moves, Ryu basically just immediately dies. Even without counter, I think Sora is just good enough at tracking Ryu with forward air and spells to where Ryu kind of always has to be on alert offstage regardless of his percent, whereas as Sora, as long as I don't get popped like a down air, I'm usually living off stage for a pretty long time. Both characters have pretty strong ledge trapping, but I think the gap in terms of how well Sora can edgeguard Ryu as opposed to Ryu not really wanting to chase Sora offstage himself makes offstage a pretty clear strength in Sora's favor. So to reiterate, I definitely don't think Sora should be outright camping Ryu. I don't think his spells are good enough as opposed to Ryu's Shadow Hadoken, but I do think Sora can get a lot of mileage off of simply not fearing having his back close to the ledge as opposed to Ryu, where like if he gets thrown off stage, he has to be on alert immediately. So I separated Ken from Ryu because, you know, in practice he is noticeably different from Ryu, but I don't think the order of the categories actually changes at all. Ken is very good at killing Sora on stage of his combos, and he still has to focus attack just like Ryu to get out of Sora's own combos, so he tends to outpace in kill power. Ken loses Shaco Hadoken, but he's also just faster, so I feel like it's easier for him to force his short range advantage as opposed to Ryu. You could argue that Sora slightly wins the area control category due to the lack of that Shaco Hadoken, and I'd probably agree. I just think regardless, area control is still a little less relevant than offstage. For basically the same reasons as Ryu, Ken has a lot more fear regarding being offstage than Sora does, and both characters are good at ledge trapping, so I feel like that gap in edge guarding is what gives Sora the advantage. Sora is just more comfortable being offstage and forcing offstage interactions as opposed to Ken, and that's usually what Sora wants to focus on regardless of whether it's Ken or Ryu that he's fighting. Now, if you know anything about Cloud, you know that most of the time this character loses stocks or loses sets in general, it's because of offstage interactions. And I think that's also true for the Sora matchup, but there is a little bit of nuance here. Yes, Cloud really does not want to recover versus Sora because he could just die at any percent, but Cloud also has some of the most notorious ledge trapping in the game, while also not being that bad at just outright edge guarding Sora himself, whether it be with down air or if he has limit. Cross slash can be very hard for Sora to consistently avoid. Cloud certainly still has to fear dying earlier off stage than Sora does in the matchup, but it is worth considering the fact that you don't really want to be at the ledge too often because it might just lead you to taking more damage than you really have to. Kill power is in the middle for this matchup because although I would say Sora definitely has more outright kill confirms than Cloud, I think one, the fact that Sora is usually fishing for a rising aerial makes it pretty easy for Cloud to just up smash him or something like that, or up B if the Sora is getting a little too hasty. A lot of Cloud's stray hits tend to stale once you reach those kill percents, but Sora is light enough to where I still feel like Cloud can often take Sora's stock at a reasonable percent. Area control is certainly where Sora is at its least effective in this matchup though. I don't think Sora gains much from really trying to play the long game versus Cloud. You're losing mid-range scuffles on average due to the gap in frame data, and while Sora is technically better at long range, the ability for Cloud to just kind of charge limit means that Sora doesn't really want to just be sitting on the back foot for the whole match. This is a matchup where you really have to make Cloud fear the possibilities of getting knocked off stage and find openings off of that, rather than just trying to play the straight neutral game, because otherwise Cloud is almost certainly going to outpace Sora and eventually outscale him with limit over time. Now, for Corrin, honestly, I think this matchup is relatively even in a lot of factors. Sora and Corrin function pretty similarly in terms of what they're looking for. So you could debate how accurate this ordering is, but like if I had to pick what I find is Sora's best bet in the matchup, it's usually area control. I say this simply because I think both characters have good mid-range. Corrin's is arguably a little more consistent, but Sora's spells are much better than Corrin's Fang Shot, whatever it's called. And I feel like both of the characters really only want to be at short range for a grab, and Sora on average gets much more off of a grab than Corrin. Off stage is in the middle because obviously Sora has a much better recovery than Corrin, but I think Corrin's ledge trapping, especially with Pin, is really good versus Sora's recovery to where it kind of just evens out to where neither character really wants to be on the receiving end of an edge guard or ledge trap. Kill power is the lowest category, but it's not even that I think it's hard to take Corrin stock. I mean, Sora's combos are fine on Corrin. I just feel like due to how good Corrin's out of shield is and the fact that they tend to be very airborne when playing neutral, it's just harder for Sora to find these combo openings without putting himself in immediate danger. Sora's low weight also makes it pretty easy for Corrin to net stocks with their relatively simpler confirms, like confirms into up airs or back air. I just feel like if I had to pick the worst category, it's kill power, but again, I think Sora and Corrin are even in a lot of ways, so you could argue different orderings here, but in my head, I think the easiest thing for Sora to do is probably just to play campier, because it's something that Corrin can't do to the same extent. For Bayonetta, same order of the categories as Corrin, but I think it's much more extreme this time in the way that I think Sora should definitely be focusing on area control and definitely should not be focusing on kill power. We'll talk about kill power first, it's probably the easiest one. Yes, Bayonetta is very light, but she also has a frame 1 escape in her bats within, so a lot of Sora's combos are much less practical, whereas Sora does not have nearly as an intuitive of a way to avoid Bayonetta's combos, so usually if the Sora is fishing too much for combos, he's just going to get outpaced by Bayonetta doing the same, except hers actually works. Sora can still take Bayonetta stock reasonably early, around like 90 to 100% with basic confirms, but Bayonetta's not really at risk at dying at like stupid early percents, whereas Sora, like if he messes up once, you get caught with like by like a witch twist, like you could just die at like 50 or 60, so I definitely wouldn't focus on kill power that much. Off stage is in the middle here because both characters have so many options while they're in the air that it kind of wraps around to both of them being able to pressure the other off stage. Both characters can cover a good amount of space off stage, both characters have pretty strong counters, so it feels pretty even off stage in a way that like a lot of the times nothing's really going to happen to either character, but you know, sometimes they might just lose a stock at 50. Area control is where I think Sora should focus the most on, the first obvious reason being that he just pretty clearly has the effective range advantage, he has disjoints, and he has spells that are generally more threatening and can cover more space than what Bayonetta's bullets can do, like or neutral B, I forget the name of it. Additionally, Bayonetta can be fast, but it tends to be in the form of like burst options, like Afterburner Kick, which like if Sora just plays to not get hit by it or to crouch under it, usually Bayonetta has to be a lot more careful of how she approaches. For Inkling, I think kill power is something that Inkling struggles with a lot, and Sora is really good at abusing that. Inkling can rack up damage pretty well, and you know, if they can land the grab, Sora can dive to up throw combos pretty consistently, but I just feel like they don't have anything that matches just how strong and versatile Sora's combos are. I've had so many games versus Inkling where the first stock is actually very close, like we're both at like high percent, and then it still ends with me like 3-stocking them or borderline JB3 because they just can't kill me, and then I snowball because now I have rage to just keep comboing them. Area control is in the middle because while I do think Sora has the clear mid-range advantage, and I think his spells are more of a consistent threat than Inkling's Splatter Shot, Inkling is just really fast, like very fast, like way faster than Sora. And Splatter Shot, while it's not like gonna kill Sora or anything, it is pretty good at just racking damage up in a way that doesn't put Inkling in much immediate danger. Inkling's dash can also make it to where they avoid rising aerials from Sora on random occasions. Not like a huge deal, but something worth mentioning. Offstage is probably the worst thing for Sora to focus on because I just think Inkling's higher airspeed and air acceleration makes them better at tracking Sora offstage than Sora is tracking them offstage, and Inkling's ledge trapping with Splat Bomb can also be pretty scary. I also feel like the ledge is basically the only situation I'm getting hit by Splat Roller other than just falling asleep in neutral. Ridley is another matchup where I think people are mistaken in that they think Sora just wins it because he does combos, and the combos do help, but I actually think area control is the main thing Sora focuses on in this matchup in order to win. I think Ridley's large hurt box and slowness in the air makes it harder for him to abuse his mid-range in a way that matters. It kind of creates this awkward situation where like he doesn't want to be too close to Sora, but he also doesn't want to be too far away because now he's getting spell camped, so he tends to just take a lot of damage trying to find good hits. Now again, it's not to say that Sora's combos aren't relevant, it's what keeps kill power in the middle. Because if Sora's not doing combos, then Ridley is almost certainly outpacing Sora in the kill power department because Ridley is noticeably heavier, and a lot of his anti-air stuff, especially like up smash, is just really good at taking Sora's stock if they fall asleep at the wheel. Also important to mention that Ridley does not have a frame point air dodge, so although he has a big hurt box, I wouldn't say the combos on him are trivial, but they're still important enough to have around because otherwise I do think Ridley would outpace Sora in kill power. Offstage is where I think Sora loses the most in this matchup, at least in my experience when I fight Ridley's, I usually lose due to some offstage shenanigans, especially at the ledge. I think Ridley probably has top 10 ledge trapping in the entire game, and I think Sora has a hard time avoiding it because if Sora tries to just opt for a high recovery, well now you're dealing with up air, you're dealing with up smash. It's uncomfy to be at the ledge at basically any situation in a way that I don't think Sora's ability to edgeguard Ridley pretty well makes up for the fact that like if you miss that edgeguard, you're dealing with a full edge trap from Ridley, and that's just straight up his win con in my opinion. Versus Belmont's, the obvious thing that Sora does not want to do is focus too much on area control, because that's basically the main thing that Belmonts have going for them in any matchup, let alone this one. Extremely obvious range advantage, they have their uppercut out of shield to deal with Sora if Sora gets too hasty once he does approach, and Sora just doesn't really have the mobility to weave around the projectiles in a way that it would benefit him to just sit around and try to rack up damage in that way. Sora is pretty clearly trying to approach when he can. Offstage is in the middle here, and if you asked me this question a few years ago, I might have put offstage on the top, but besides the fact that Simon and Victor are like deceptively annoying to edgeguard due to how quickly they can tether to the stage, I also just think how strong their ledge trapping is evens out with how well Sora can edgeguard them back. It's just kind of a matchup where neither side really wants to be on the receiving end. It's a matchup where both sides can very clearly edgeguard the other, but ironically, if either side focuses too much on that win con, I think they'll actually lose. Kill power is what I think Sora actually needs to focus on versus this character, because Simon doesn't really have consistent kill confirms. He has some crazy item setups, don't get me wrong, like we've all seen like the cross into down air into up B combos or up smash, right? But they're very situational and pretty easy to avoid if you're just kind of mindful of them a lot of the time. Even at top level where the Belmonts are a lot better at landing stuff like this, I just find Sora's confirms to be a lot more reliable and consistent, and usually Sora is the one taking early stocks due to some cheese rather than Belmont. You honestly don't even really need the super long combos versus Belmont, it's more about just racking up damage comfortably and then just being ready to land their out smash when you get the chance. That's usually enough to outpace them in the kill power regard, but combos can definitely help as well. King K. Rool is a character that I don't think Sora should be losing to in really any context, but whenever I see Soras do lose it, it is almost certainly because they're focusing too much on area control. King K. Rool's projectiles are very linear, and Sora does have counter to help deal with them, but they also just tend to be more threatening over a long period of time as opposed to Sora spells, both in terms of covering space and leading into stronger attacks. Combined with K. Rool having his own reflector and being a little faster than Sora, usually when I watch Soras lose to this character, it's because they play neutral for a while, think it's going okay, and then eventually they just make a mistake, get hit by like a backwards crown toss thing, and then they just explode because it's like you're just not really racking up damage in a way that matters if you're playing too much away from King K. Rool, at least in my opinion. Offstage is in the middle. If I was being brutally honest here, I do think Sora wins the offstage category, but I think K. Rool can match him in it decently enough to where I'd put it in the middle rather than as Sora's best option. King K. Rool is not particularly difficult to track off stage, and Sora's counter can even hit their helicopter up B from like just standing on top of the ledge. But I will admit, there are moments where I'm offstage versus K. Rool and I'm pretty scared because K. Rool has the ability to either edge guard like a down air or back air, or even just like a fast fall armored nair. And if they opt for the ledge, they can be decently scary there too. So K. Rool definitely has options to make Sora fear offstage a little bit, at least to the point where I don't think offstage is the absolute best thing Sora can focus on. Kill power is where Sora should absolutely be outpacing this character in my opinion. Despite the large weight gap, King K. Rool simply does not have any options faster than frame forward to deal with Sora's combos, so even though he is heavy, given just any platform or just a Sora that knows how to loop someone from one end of the stage to the other, K. Rool is at risk of dying at basically any percent. Can K. Rool find openings and occasionally take Sora stock at like 70 or 80? Yeah, absolutely. But Sora can find openings and take stocks at 10 or 20, so yeah, I think Sora should be winning this category, but you know, if you don't have the combos on hand, what should be a winning matchup can get a lot spookier. For Isabelle, I think both Isabelle and Villager share a trait in that offstage is probably the worst thing for Sora to focus on in the matchup. Isabelle has fairly non-committal ways to pressure Sora offstage with like Lloyd Rocket setups, the fishing rod, dash attack, things like that. Whereas like Sora can edgeguard Isabelle, but it usually requires him to actually jump out and chase her, and it can be pretty hard to do that because Isabelle is pretty fast in her recovery. Now, unlike Villager, I think Isabelle fares noticeably better in the kill confirm category to where I don't think Sora can focus on kill power as much as he does versus Villager. However, Isabelle is still pretty light herself and lacks any better of a combo escape tool than air dodge, so it's a matchup where both characters can die surprisingly early in my opinion. What Isabelle gains in kill confirms though, I think she gives up in general area control, which is what I think Sora should be mostly focusing on in this matchup. She's better at short range, but she lacks the mobility to really force that short range comfortably in my opinion, while still having the mid-range problem and having a worse long range because her Lloyd Rocket is no longer a projectile, or at least not a projectile that actually moves forward. Unlike Villager, I think this is a matchup where Sora can kind of get away with just playing somewhat patiently, waiting for the Isabelle to try to force their way in. Not necessarily camping out Isabelle, but, you know, just you don't have to focus as much on taking earlier stocks because she'll just tend to take more damage in neutral if you play it properly. For Incineroar, I would say offstage is a pretty obvious primary win con for Sora here. Incin's recovery is notoriously linear. Honestly, just by paying attention to what options he's already used, you can usually cover most of the space you can go to with spells, back air, even just up airing him and forcing him to pick another option again. Tends to work pretty well against him. Incin can occasionally edgeguard Sora with the right reads, and he can also be kind of scary at the ledge, but I just don't really think this stacks up to Sora's ability to just outright cheese Incin stock at like 30 offstage. There's just too many mix-ups on Sora's end that Incin just cannot match. Area control is in the middle, and this might not make a lot of sense to you considering the fact that Sora is faster, has a disjoint that Incin doesn't have, and has projectiles that Incin doesn't have. but it all comes down to revenge. Sora's spells cover a lot of space, sure, but they're very telegraphed in a way that Incin can pretty easily revenge them, and if you let Incin revenge a bunch of projectiles, well now the next time Incin hits you, you're taking 50 or 60%. In general, Sora usually likes to control space by doing it in a way that he doesn't really have to think too much about the consequences, and Incin's revenge forces Sora to think way more about whether or not he throws out a move. Incin's out of shield can also make just throwing out nairs and whatnot a lot more risky. Revenge is also another big reason why kill power is the worst thing for Sora to go for in the matchup, because if you didn't know, Revenge is active on frame 3, which makes it just as consistent as just air dodging out of a combo, except unlike an air dodge where Sora can kind of just chase Incin after. With Revenge, if Sora hits the Revenge, the advantage state just ends, and now Incin's next attack is going to do even more damage. Even without Revenge, with how heavy Incineroar is and just the number of options he has that can take Sora's stock due to how light Sora is, it's just really inconsistent to try to take Incin stock too early. You more so want to focus on cheesing off stage when you can and kind of just playing out neutral until you can reach that point. For Piranha Plant, I can vouch that kill power is the worst thing you could focus on versus this character, and I know this because I tried to do that versus Lucky and exploded into a million pieces at LMBM. Besides Plant just being really heavy and having a bunch of moves that will just randomly kill Sora, combos on Plant are just really annoying. His hurt box is just too inconsistent when he's in hit stun for Sora to reliably combo him. Even when you land drag down, sometimes moves like up tilt just won't work for reasons that I can't really explain. Off stage is a 50-50. Both characters have pretty reliable ways of pressuring the other off stage. Plant's recovery is not very strong in a vacuum, and even his mix-ups at the ledge with like Patooey setups, Sora can just kind of counter to Patooey and not care as much. However, with the amount of space that Plant can cover with his own edge guards of Patooey and his down B and like nair, down air, even like landing with back air, off stage can be very scary for Sora. It's a matchup where both sides definitely have to be on high alert whenever they have to recover against the other. Area control is likely the best thing for Sora to do because although Piranha Plant has projectiles in his neutral B and side B, they're pretty unconventional in terms of how they control space and are just not that reliable as consistent neutral tools. Combined with Plant's lack of fast disjoints and a lot of his short range moves not actually being that safe, Sora can usually get a lot of mileage from just carefully playing out neutral, countering Patooey and Poison Breath when they show up, and not forcing things too much, because forcing things is how you get hit by a lot of out-of-shield moves and try to land combos that just don't really work. Finally made it to Fighters Pass territory. For Joker, I would say that kill power is the thing that Sora should focus the most on, and considering that scary red guy in the back, you're probably wondering why that is the case. Ultimately, it comes down to, I don't think Joker is good enough at taking stocks with Arsene to make up for how bad they are at taking stocks without them. It's kind of similar to the Wario problem where, yeah, Joker is scary when he has Arsene, but Sora is scary at every point of the match. Obviously not to the same extent because Arsene is a lot more versatile than Waft and is usually going to be up for longer than Waft. But I do think the fact that Joker is kind of forced to approach once he does have the Arsene in order to actually use it in a way that matters makes him a lot more telegraphed and means that you're not actually going to take as much damage from Arsene as long as you play it carefully. Area control is in the middle ground here because although Joker is a lot faster and has better frame data in terms of just safety, he has a pretty hard time dealing with Sora's mid-range. Additionally, although Joker's long range is much more consistent and can rack up damage, it's usually not going to actually net Joker a stock or even like a confirm into anything, whereas Sora's Faraga can lead into things like a grab or just a nair combo. Freeze could lead into getting hit by something else. There's just a much higher risk from Joker getting hit by Sora's spells as opposed to Sora getting pelted by Gun and A-Hop. Joker's Pour Out a Shield in particular really makes it so that once Sora does get in, it's really hard for Joker to force Sora off of him in a way that matters. Like, he has like up smash out of shield, but it's not that hard to bait. Back air can work, but Sora has to be behind him. There's just too many variables to how Joker can reliably deal with Sora out of shield. This leaves offstage as the worst thing for Sora to focus on in this matchup. Yes, Sora can edgeguard Joker with Arsene pretty well because a lot of his moves can two-frame him, but it's kind of the opposite issue with the kill power where, like, yeah, when he has Arsene, you can edgeguard him. But Joker can edgeguard Sora with or without Arsene, and with Arsene it just becomes brutal to deal with. Even if Joker doesn't outright take the stock, the amount of damage they can rack from just using down gun and back airing when Sora has to recover in a certain way is honestly pretty brutal. It's a tricky matchup to where Sora can't really just hard camp, but you don't really want to rush too much either because you don't want to find yourself jumping off stage. You kind of just want to trust in your ability to outdamage and outkill Joker over time, and not put yourself in too many risky situations, especially versus Arsene. For Hero, I would say that area control is not only the worst category for this matchup in particular, I think this might just be the worst character to try to camp in the entire game. He can find Accelerate to be way faster than Sora can reasonably camp out or stay away from. He can find Bounce so that Sora's spells do quite literally nothing. He has a bunch of random FU tools out of command menu that might just kill Sora, like Kaboom and Flame Slash and Sizzle, so you always have to read the menu so that you don't die from it. Even without the menu, Hero's zap moves are just really good at keeping Sora in check because Sora does not have the mobility to jump around it very well. And above all else, if you sit around for too long, you're just letting Hero charge mana for free. So yeah, you really should not be trying to have a long game versus this character. Offstage is in the middle because it's very hard to judge consistently. RNG matters a lot here. A lot of Hero's best tools for the ledge are tied to something in command menu, and whether or not Sora gets to edgeguard Hero at all is tied to whether or not Hero pulls Zoom. Kind of just a feast or famine category that is entirely tied to RNG, so I just threw it in the middle. I think kill power is the main thing Sora can focus on to win this matchup because it's the one category that I think Hero absolutely needs good RNG to do well in, whereas Sora always has his combos on the ready. Sure, if Hero just keeps fishing for some random kill move out of command menu, he'll eventually hit it, but a lot of heroes won't opt to do that because if they're wasting mana on kill moves, it means they're not going to have mana to help with finding things like Bounce and Accelerate to help their neutral. So usually Sora is outpacing in terms of just taking early percent stocks. Versus Banjo, Sora is better off stage for one very obvious reason. He has the one counter in the entire game that just outright beats Wonder Wing. Not only does it beat the Wonder Wing, if Banjo is anywhere above like 30%, they'll just explode. This may seem like a bit of an oversimplification, and it kind of is. Banjo has some pretty strong ledge trapping on his own, but you'd be surprised just how much Sora being able to just cut off Wonder Wing really hurts Banjo's recovery in the long term. Banjo's aerial mobility is very slow, and he often has to rely on Wonder Wing in a lot of matchups to actually force opponents to respect him at range off stage. Sora doesn't have to respect him in the same way, so there's way more times that Banjo will just die off stage at very early percents. Kill power is in the middle. I think both characters are pretty good at taking stocks off of the other at top level. Sora has his combos that Banjo doesn't really have a lot of ways to get out of, but Banjo also has some pretty crazy top level combos, and Sora is just light enough to where even if the combo is particularly long, getting hit by like an up tilt or just a forward smash or up smash in the wrong spots can take his stock pretty early. Area control is where I think Sora should focus the least in this matchup. Banjo is noticeably faster, and their projectiles are just much more consistently available and honestly more threatening at top level as opposed to Sora's spells. It feels like a matchup where Sora's can get a little too comfortable trying to camp because it feels like something they can do, but more often you're kind of just letting the Banjo get away with not really having to risk going off stage that much and eventually just whittling you down. You really want to use the fact that Banjo is scared to go off stage and be in certain positions in disadvantage and force them to make uncomfortable decisions. Versus Terry, I would say offstage is usually where I find the most openings in the matchup. Terry's basic aerial mobility is very poor, and a lot of his recovery focuses on the fact that they all have hitboxes to protect him, but that just means that Sora can counter all of them. Similar to the Shoto characters, being at the ledge versus Terry for too long can be pretty annoying, but I don't find myself dying a lot of the time, at least not at early percents, whereas Terry can just get gimped at any point. In regards to area control, I think Sora and Terry are actually very even. I mean, Terry has the clear close range advantage, Sora has a mid range advantage, and although Sora's spells are more threatening in a way, Terry's Power Wave is just way more consistent and is really good versus Sora in particular because if Sora commits to jumping, his double jump is really not good at neutral. Burning Knuckle and Crack Shoot can also make using spells at like mid to long range a lot riskier. Kill power is the least relevant category for Sora in this matchup, and it's not that Sora can't occasionally choose Terry, he doesn't really have like a focus attack or any frame 2 or frame 1 escape. However, Terry's out of shield can be really annoying to deal with when trying to fish for combos, and if Terry gets go, Sora can die at genuinely comical percents. It's really bad. Versus Byleth, I think a lot of Soras get baited into thinking they're supposed to camp with spells because Byleth's projectile isn't as consistent, not realizing that Byleth's forward air covers just as much space as most of Sora's spells, if not more. I think area control is the worst thing for Sora to focus on in this matchup because you're usually just getting out-damaged over time. Byleth's out of shield in particular can make it pretty hard for Sora to abuse their Nair. Granted, Sora's out of shield is also pretty good at dealing with Byleth out of shield, but I just think Byleth is getting more damage off of stray hits than Sora on average. Off stage is the middle ground. There are certainly moments where Byleth is very scary to deal with at the ledge and can also be a little annoying to edgeguard, but there are also a lot of windows that Sora can edgeguard Byleth that I don't think people realize. If you're in front of Byleth, you can just throw spells from a safe distance. If you're below Byleth, you can usually land an up air before Byleth has time to down air. As long as you're not on top of Byleth, you can actually edgeguard them pretty well. Byleth's edgeguarding and especially ledge trapping is still devastating enough to where I don't think Sora should be focusing on going off stage, but it's a much more viable strategy than I think people realize. I would say that kill power is Sora's best bet in this matchup, which may not make a lot of sense because Byleth has a lot of strong stray hits and Sora's pretty light. However, due to Byleth's lack of mobility, it's pretty hard for him to actually land these stray hits without hard reads in neutral, whereas Sora's confirms and combos are just a lot more consistent on netting stocks. Even if you don't have the longer combos, you'll usually just kind of outpace a Byleth as long as you're not getting caught by like down smash shenanigans or being too jump happy and getting backer or something like that. Usually when I see Soras lose this matchup, it's because they're playing too passively. I think Sora beats his character by playing almost belligerently and really taking advantage of those blind spots in situations where Byleth's mobility just isn't enough for them to avoid Sora's advantage state. Versus Min Min, I don't think I really have to explain to you how she has the range advantage and why area control is not really something that Sora should focus on too much. Sora does have some counterplay for Min Min's arms. Occasionally his aerials such as Nairs clink with Min Min's arms, and if he counters them, Min Min will be stunned for a little while, but I wouldn't say these are consistent options as much as they are just occasional callouts. There's also the fact that even when Sora does get in, Min Min is actually pretty good at getting off of Sora, whether it be down tilting, up smashing out of shield, or just kind of throwing out Ram Nairs when he gets close. Off stage is pretty bad for both sides. Min Min's recovery is pretty exploitable. I do think it's a little underrated in terms of how fast she can tether recovery, but I mean, with how well Sora can remain off stage and throwing out spells and stuff, Sora can still edgeguard Min Min pretty comfortably. But Min Min is also extremely good at edgeguarding Sora due to the fact that she can pressure Sora without ever putting herself in immediate danger, which is usually the only real risk in edgeguarding Sora because otherwise he doesn't even move that quickly, so if you find yourself dealing with a charged Ram, you're usually just going to have to hold that unless you manage to mix up your timing in a way that the Min Min messes up. Kill power is what I believe Sora does the best in, but I do want to stress that this is on stage kill power, as if you remain off stage for too long, you can just get like charged dragon lasered and die at 40 or something like that. Min Min can be pretty telegraphed when she's going for stocks. Megawatt is very slow and makes her retentions very obvious. She doesn't really have any kill confirms. Her closest thing to a kill throw is up throw, but even then it's not that strong and her grab isn't that good. I find Sora's kill confirms to be a lot more threatening and consistent than what Min Min has to offer on stage, even if you don't have the longer combos on deck. But you do want to be applying consistent pressure in my opinion, because you're not really gaining much from trying to wait out Min Min's options. She's just going to go across the stage and attack you from a range that Sora can't reasonably counter from. Versus Steve, I was kind of going back and forth on whether offstage or area control was the most important thing to do, but regardless, I think kill power is what you should not be focusing on as much versus Steve. It's not that Sora's combos aren't doable on Steve, I've done them on numerous occasions. The risk-reward just doesn't really make a lot of sense when you consider how good Steve is at scrapping with like gold tools, diamond tools, and just how good his reversal options are. Sora can also get comboed pretty hard by Steve, but unlike Steve, he doesn't really have many scary reversal options to do that would really dissuade Steve from fishing for them in my opinion. Area control in the matchup is kind of on a timer. I think at the start of the round, Sora is actually pretty strong in terms of controlling space due to Steve being the slowest character in the game, or up there anyway, and just kind of having a hard time scrapping with Sora's hitboxes, at least when he's stuck with wooden tools. I also think Sora is pretty good at dealing with blocks via up air and Thundaga, and counter can help dissuade Steve from throwing out as many minecarts, so on paper area control sounds fine. The problem is that Sora doesn't really have the mobility to approach in a way that doesn't feel telegraphed, so odds are he either has to put himself at risk to stop Steve from mining, or just kind of let Steve get diamonds and hope he doesn't get hit by them, and in practice you can understand why that's not very practical in either scenario. Not to say Sora should be rushing, I explained in the kill power section why you shouldn't do that. But it's not really a matchup that you can kind of just sit around and stall Steve out like some other more mobile characters can. Where I believe Sora gets the most mileage versus Steve is offstage. For one, Steve is very reliant on his minecart to cover some of his recoveries, and versus Sora, he can't really rely on that as much because of Sora's counter. If Sora counters that minecart near the ledge, Steve will die at basically any percent, especially if it's powered minecart. But honestly, the bigger reason why I think offstage is good for Sora in this matchup, or at least his best option, is I really don't think Steve can checkmate him with any of his setups in the same way that he can versus a lot of other characters. If Steve tries to set up TNT, Sora can just Thundaga it. If Steve tries to block up Sora with blocks, he usually just does not have the resources to deal with all of Sora's recovery options. Not saying I've never died off stage or anything, but I feel like usually when I'm beating this character, it's due to situations that arise from Steve trying to get off the ledge and their inability to stop me from being off stage for very often. Now we have Sephiroth, whose order of win cons is the exact opposite of Steve's, and for good reason. He's a very different character. Off stage is very scary for Sora just because of the fact that Sephiroth has the mobility to both cover a lot of options and the range to do so without actually putting himself at much risk. Sora can occasionally edgeguard Sephiroth back, but it usually requires some type of hard read, and once he makes it to the ledge, it's just not really worth trying to deal with it. Sora can't do much to Sephiroth's plinking beyond just throwing out spells from a safe distance, whereas Sephiroth's ledge trapping is extremely dangerous and usually how Sora loses pretty early stocks in the matchup. Area control is in the middle because although Sephiroth is noticeably faster and has a clear long range advantage, he has a lot of blind spots anywhere closer than long range, and his frame data is also pretty slow. Crouching in particular is very strong versus Sephiroth. A lot of his aerials will whiff unless they're perfectly timed, F-tilt will whiff unless they actively aim it downwards, and it's just more mental stack to put on the Sephiroth's brain. However, where I definitely think Sora should focus on in this matchup is in on-stage kill power. Sephiroth has a really unfortunate combination of tall hurtbox and lightweight, making Sora's combos extremely good versus him. To the point where if you're really good at them, you might have multiple stocks where Sephiroth doesn't even get to use one wing. Sora is fairly light as well, but I don't think Sephiroth's kill confirms are nearly as accessible or applicable in most situations as opposed to Sora's. His lack of threatening out of shield also makes it easier for Sora to fish for his combos in a way that doesn't put himself in much immediate danger. Now versus Pyra and Mythra, offstage being the best bet is a fairly common strategy amongst most of the cast fighting this character. Pyra and Mythra are at risk of losing their stock at basically any percent offstage due to how exploitable their recovery is and how much space Sora can cover both offstage and at the ledge with things like F-tilt and dash attack. I do think it's important to note that I don't think this is a matchup that Sora should be remaining offstage for too long, just because Mythra and especially Pyra's ledge trapping and edge guarding can be very scary for Sora to deal with. It's just something where you have to be really opportunistic in the moments that Pyra and Mythra do end up offstage. With kill power, it's a double-edged sword regardless of whether you're facing Pyra or Mythra. Sora's combos are very inconsistent on Mythra due to her foresight, but Mythra lacks very strong kill confirms of her own. Sora's combos are much more consistent on Pyra, but Pyra can take Sora stock fairly early due to how light he is and doing confirms like down tilt into up air or down air up smash, both options that are really hard for Sora to avoid and can kill him very early. Area control is definitely something I don't think Sora should focus on, and your mind might go to Mythra as the reason why. While it's certainly true that Mythra tends to win neutral versus Sora due to how fast she is and having foresight to deal with spell spam, I think it's underrated how good Pyra is at dealing with Sora in neutral as well. Blazing End wins versus all of Sora's spells, and although Pyra herself is clearly slower, Sora is also slow, so he can't really abuse the fact that Pyra is slow in a way that matters, especially when you consider that a lot of Pyra's hitboxes are bigger than Sora's. This is definitely a matchup where you have to use the fact that Pyramith don't want to be off stage as leverage to get them to make some uncomfortable decisions, because otherwise you're definitely not going to win the game in the long term. Nearing the end here, versus Kazuya, if you know anything about what this character does to win, you are probably not that surprised that kill power is the least relevant aspect here. You may be thinking that Sora's combos would make this more even, but there's a couple caveats in practice that make this a lot less realizable. Assuming that both Sora and Kazuya are landing their combos consistently, Kazuya would still have the upper hand in kill power because he's heavier, and a lot of his just stray hits are way better at taking stocks than Sora's are. Up B, Rage Drive, Kazuya just has a ton of options that can kind of just take stocks on their own without necessarily needing to combo into them. Additionally, Sora's best combo starter is an aerial. Kazuya's best combo starter is an anti-air. If you know anything about fighting games, you could probably understand why this would be pretty hard to deal with in practice. Now, given that a lot of the counterplay versus Kazuya stems down to not playing the game with him, you probably would expect that area control would be the most important aspect, but I would disagree for Sora in particular. Not only is Sora just not that fast, I find his spells to be too telegraphed to actually keep out a Kazuya who knows what they're doing. Sora's range still certainly deserves respect from Kazuya, otherwise you're going to take a lot of unnecessary damage, but it's not something that Sora can fall back on for too long because I don't think he has the mobility to get out quickly once Kazuya does get in. Offstage is what I believe Sora should focus on the most versus Kazuya, because although Kazuya's recovery is relatively good compared to the other FGC characters, Sora still has many ways to deal with it in a way that Kazuya can lose his stock fairly early offstage. Additionally, the risk reward for Kazuya trying to edgeguard Sora back tends to be pretty bad. I'm not saying that Sora will never die off stage. Sometimes you just get like comboed into a Nair train, sometimes you get hit with like a back air on a ledge jump, but a lot of these tends to be more of like hard callouts, whereas Sora can really just checkmate Kazuya if he has to be off stage for too long. Kazuya also isn't that great at dealing with Sora planking. I don't think you should rely on that for too long, but it is something to keep in mind. I have zero notes on the Ditto, you're all just gonna camp me out anyways, regardless of what I say.